Today, we are going to look at the worst revenge deaths ever recorded, from betrayed partners whose trust turned to deadly resolve, to forgotten victims who returned years later to settle scores that time never erased. It was August 14th, 2015, in Pahrump, Nevada, a dry, quiet town about an hour west of Las Vegas. On that Friday afternoon, neighbors along Arrow Canyon Drive saw a silver sedan pull into the Daly's driveway. Inside were Laura and Mitch Daly, newlyweds who had returned home from their honeymoon in Cancun. They'd only been gone a week, but people noticed they came back sooner than planned. The couple looked tired. Laura waved briefly to the neighbor across the street before closing the garage door. Laura, 29, owned a small bookstore on Basin Avenue. Mitch, 33, worked as a part-time contractor around town. They'd lived in the same house for 3 years before marrying, and neighbors described them as polite but quiet. Most evenings, they kept to themselves. 2 days before, Laura had texted her coworker that they might cut the trip short. When asked why, she only replied that Mitch had run through the travel money. It didn't make much sense at the time. The coworker assumed maybe they lost luggage or had an unexpected expense. No one thought it meant anything more. That Friday night, around 9 p.m., one of the neighbors, a retired man named Carl, said he heard raised voices through his back fence. He thought it was a TV at first, but then came the sound of something breaking, glass, followed by a door slamming. He said the argument lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then it went silent. Around 10, he noticed the kitchen lights switch off and figured the fight was over. The next morning, the Daly's car was still in the driveway, curtains drawn, no sign of anyone coming or going. Carl's wife mentioned seeing their porch light flicker around midnight, but that was it. Sunday came and went. Still no movement. What happened inside those walls that weekend was pieced together later. Mitch had admitted to Laura that he had gambled away their honeymoon fund, not during the trip, but weeks before the wedding. He'd used the money from her late father's inheritance, the same savings she'd been keeping untouched for years. When he confessed, she reportedly locked herself inside the bathroom. A text recovered from Mitch's phone, sent that night to a friend, said they were settling things that night. That was the last message he ever sent. On Monday morning, the same neighbor who had heard the argument noticed a strong chemical smell while watering his plants. He thought maybe a cleaning spill. By afternoon, the odor got worse, sharp, like bleach. When no one answered the door, he called local deputies to check the house. They arrived just after 5 p.m. The front door was locked, but an open window in the kitchen allowed entry. Inside, everything looked still. Dishes in the sink, luggage left unpacked in the living room. The officers followed the smell down the hallway to the master bathroom. They found the master bathroom's tub filled to the rim with cloudy, bleach-tinted water that gave off a sharp chemical smell layered over something organic. Laura lay mostly submerged. Her skin showed early signs of breakdown and discoloration where it met the water. Toward the rim, foam and bits of dissolved material floated against the porcelain. The walls were damp and a towel sat on the counter. In the garage, Mitch hung from a beam. A single note beside him said they were even now. Investigators later determined that the timeline lined up with Friday night's argument. No one else had entered or left the property. It appeared that after Laura died, Mitch cleaned the area, moved to the garage, and took his own life. The report described the scene as calm, almost staged. Nothing knocked over, no sign of struggle, just silence. The couple's phones were left charging beside the bed, both screens dark. Word spread quietly through Pahrump, and people slowed down when passing the Daly's house. The wedding banner still clung to the garage, and the bleach smell stayed for days. Their relatives came to collect belongings, but no one bought the property. Police ruled it a murder-suicide linked to gambling and money trouble. The house stayed empty, and locals said no one parked in that driveway again. It was September 9th, 2018. Just outside Las Vegas, Nevada, Red Rock Canyon stretched quiet under the heat, the sandstone ridges catching the evening light. Two brothers, Alan and Mark Hensley, drove to Red Rock Canyon for a weekend camping trip. They hadn't spoken in a year after arguing over their father's inheritance. Alan wanted to rebuild the ranch, while Mark used his share to buy a home in Henderson. When Alan called to make peace, Mark agreed. That Friday morning, they stopped at a hardware store near Blue Diamond for supplies. The cashier noticed them arguing, though Alan appeared unusually cheerful when they left for the canyon. The brothers set up camp near a dry creek bed about 6 miles from the main trail. Alan's truck was parked at a pull-off beside the road. The weather was warm, around the mid-90s during the day, and dropped into the 60s at night. Rangers who later reviewed the logbook saw that Allen had checked in under his own name, but didn't mention a second camper. That night, a few other hikers reported faint voices echoing from the ridge around 9 p.m., followed by the distant sound of a rock slide. No one thought much of it at the time. Sometime before sunrise, Allen took apart Mark's gear. He loosened the shoulder straps on his backpack and drilled a small hole near the base of his metal canteen, a pin-sized leak that would slowly drain water with every step. When morning came, Allen told his brother he needed to return to the truck early to handle a work call. He packed his things, left a few trail markers behind, and drove off before the sun was fully up. A passing ranger saw him at the checkpoint around 8 a.m. and later told investigators that Allen said his brother wanted to stay an extra day to clear his head. 2 days later, hikers spotted what they thought was an abandoned pack near a dry wash about half a mile off the main trail. When they got closer, they found Mark's body lying face down in the sand. His skin showed signs of heat exposure, and there were deep cracks along his arms and neck from dehydration. The area around him was undisturbed, with footprints circling back toward a nearby ridge. His bag contained only half a bottle filled with sand and a torn shoulder strap, as if it had snapped under strain. Rangers noted that his canteen had a small drilled hole near the bottom edge, likely done with a power tool. Investigators retraced the brothers' steps using purchase receipts from the hardware store and surveillance from the park gate. The timeline matched Allen's early exit and Mark's last known movements on the trail. When rangers searched Allen's truck, they found his tools, including a portable drill with metal shavings inside the bit. Lab tests later confirmed the shavings matched the puncture around Mark's canteen. Allen was arrested at a motel in Henderson 3 days after Mark's body was recovered. He didn't resist when officers entered the room. During questioning, he admitted he had made sure Mark wouldn't outlast him this time. He said it wasn't planned as murder, but a test of who could handle the heat. The trial took place the following spring in Clark County. Evidence from the campsite, along with Allen's recorded statement, left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict for second-degree murder. Allen Hensley was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Reporters noted that he showed no reaction when the sentence was read. The case was briefly covered on local news before fading from headlines. Red Rock Canyon reopened its trails later that year, and rangers said people still asked which wash the Hensley brothers had camped near. No marker was ever placed. It was March 17, 2015, in State College, Pennsylvania. Spring was beginning to thaw the streets near Penn State, and students were filling the sidewalks again after a long winter. Among them was 22-year-old graduate student Evan Reyes, who had once been on track to complete a promising thesis in environmental engineering. His classmate Jared Sloan, 23, worked on the same research project, a joint study on soil filtration methods funded by the university. The two had started as partners, splitting data collection and lab work. But during their final semester, their relationship broke down. Faculty records later showed that Jared had accused Evan of copying sections of their shared research into his personal draft without permission. Evan denied it, saying they had co-authored the material from the start. When professors reviewed both documents, they sided with Jared. Within weeks, Evan was expelled for plagiarism and lost his scholarship. Evan returned to his parents' home in York, about 2 hours away. He deleted most of his social media, except for a blog where he occasionally posted short messages about academic integrity and unfinished business. Classmates said he rarely replied when they reached out, and one remembered him saying that the truth always finds its way back. By the time the fall semester arrived, Jared was the only name remaining on the original paper. That winter, he was awarded a university grant to continue the project independently. In early March, campus mail staff logged a thin envelope addressed to Jared Sloan at the department's main office. It arrived through regular mail, unmarked except for a return address from a P.O. box in York. Staff placed it in his departmental mailbox along with a stack of other papers. That morning, Jared brought the mail into the lab, where he and 2 other students were reviewing soil samples. Around 10:45 a.m., security footage showed Jared opening the envelope. A light cloud of powder burst into the air as he pulled out a folded letter. Witnesses said he coughed, then stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. One of the students nearby reached for the lab phone while another tried to help. By the time emergency services arrived, Jared had collapsed near the workbench but was still alive. Paramedics intubated him and rushed him to a medical center. The letter was found on the floor, partially torn. The lab and adjoining hallway were immediately sealed off. Fire crews arrived in full protective gear and began testing the powder for hazardous materials. The substance was later identified as a lab-synthesized compound derived from agricultural chemicals. The powder caused rapid respiratory distress, and tests showed the dose Jared inhaled was strong enough to cause respiratory collapse within an hour. Investigators traced the letter's postage back to a self-service kiosk in York, less than a mile from Evan's neighborhood. Surveillance cameras showed a man matching his description, mailing several envelopes at the same time. Authorities searched Evan's home 2 days later. They found a small quantity of the same compound, protective gloves, and several unused envelopes identical to the one sent to Jared. The handwriting on the labels matched. Evan was arrested at his parents' house without incident. During questioning, he did not deny sending the letter and told investigators he had planned it for weeks. When asked if he regretted it, he said he was only glad that Jared paid for what he stole. The incident forced the department to shut down the lab for months of decontamination and safety checks. 2 students who had been inside were treated for minor exposure and later released. Tests confirmed Jared had inhaled a lethal dose almost immediately after opening the envelope. He died at the hospital an hour later from respiratory collapse despite emergency treatment. The case went to trial that fall in Center County. Evan's defense team had little to argue. He had already confessed. The prosecution presented the lab footage, the chemical evidence, and Evan's own recorded statements. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in state prison without the possibility of parole. It was October 22, 2017, in Peoria, Illinois, a quiet suburban city split by flat highways and old brick houses. 24-year-old Dylan Parks lived in a rented duplex on the north side, known online for his gaming streams under the name Dill P. A year earlier, he had reached regional popularity after competing in a Midwest gaming tournament, but that changed when 27-year-old Chase Morrow, a well-known content creator from Chicago, accused him of cheating. Chase made the claim during a live stream that drew thousands of viewers, mocking Dylan and replaying clips of his matches. What began as trash talk turned into a targeted campaign that spread across forums and social media. Over the next few weeks, Dylan's address was posted online. Delivery drivers showed up with fake orders, and neighbors reported cars slowing down near his street. He filed one police report, but eventually stopped responding to the constant harassment. Chase never apologized. Instead, he joked about the controversy during his streams, calling Dylan a lesson in fair play. The tension lasted for months until Chase's audience lost interest and moved on to other topics. By late summer, the feud seemed over. Dylan stopped streaming entirely and deleted most of his posts. In early October, Dylan sent Chase a private message through a shared gaming server. The message was short, a simple invitation to meet halfway between Peoria and Chicago to clear the air. Chase agreed, saying he was willing to settle things in person. Both men arranged to meet at a rest stop off Interstate 55, a spot surrounded by flat farmland and a single convenience store. Security cameras later showed Chase's dark sedan pulling in at 4:18 p.m., followed 5 minutes later by Dylan's small hatchback. Witnesses at the store saw the two greet briefly before getting into Chase's car. From a distance, it looked like a normal conversation. No shouting or visible aggression. The dashcam in Chase's vehicle captured about 20 minutes of calm discussion that slowly turned into an argument. Investigators later said Dylan confronted Chase about the cheating claims and demanded he admit they were false. Chase refused. In the final minute of footage, the car suddenly shifts into gear. The camera shakes as it rolls forward, then accelerates across the shoulder and slams into a concrete barrier along the interstate. The impact crushed the front end, deploying both airbags instantly. Passing drivers stopped and called for help, but the damage was extensive. Both men were pronounced dead at the scene. State troopers recovered the dashcam, which had continued recording after the crash. The final seconds showed the car accelerating from a full stop, the engine roaring unnaturally high. There were no skid marks on the pavement, suggesting the gas pedal had been fully pressed until impact. Toxicology reports later confirmed neither man had alcohol or drugs in their system. Data from the vehicle's black box confirmed the accelerator had been fully pressed from a complete stop, but the footage ended before either man could be clearly seen. Investigators concluded that Chase, as the driver, was in control at the time of impact, though they could not determine whether it was deliberate or part of a struggle. In the weeks that followed, the online communities connected to both men went silent. Chase's channel was deleted by his management team, and Dylan's old accounts were locked down by family members. The dash cam clip was entered into evidence, but never released publicly. News outlets ran brief reports about the collision, describing it only as a fatal meeting between online rivals. The rest stop reopened 2 days later. Locals said tire marks remained visible on the concrete for weeks before fading under the next round of autumn rain. It was June 12, 2016, in Yonkers, New York. The heat had lingered well into the night, the air thick and still along the industrial stretch near Nepperhan Avenue. 42-year-old cab driver Raj Mehta had been on the job since dawn. He was known by the other drivers at the depot as patient, soft-spoken, and willing to take routes most avoided after dark. For months, he'd been dealing with a small group of local teens who used his cab for short rides, often refusing to pay and shouting insults from the back seat. He had filed complaints through dispatch twice that spring, but nothing ever came of it. That Sunday, just after 10 p.m., Raj's cab number appeared on the pickup log at Ridge Hill Mall. Security footage showed 3 teens, 2 boys and a girl, all from the nearby complex, entering his cab with paper cups in hand. A vendor at the stand nearby told police later that he had seen them earlier that evening, drinking behind the parking garage and laughing loudly. Raj kept his expression unreadable as they got in. He switched on the meter, pulled out of the taxi stand and merged onto the quiet road heading south. At first, everything looked routine. Traffic cameras tracked the yellow cab moving through downtown before veering toward the warehouse district. The lights grew sparse there, replaced by metal fencing and long rows of shipping containers. Raj's cab was an older Crown Victoria model, one of the last still running in Yonkers. Its heavy frame and manual lock system made it reliable, but dated compared to newer taxis. The vehicle turned onto a side road lined with repair shops and loading docks, a stretch that ended near a concrete barrier separating the service route from the river access lane. Around 10:25 p.m., the cab slowed briefly on camera near the curb, then disappeared beyond the last streetlight. A truck driver parked at a nearby loading dock later told investigators that he saw the cab stop for about 30 seconds. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He walked around the back of the car, bent slightly near the trunk, then stepped away toward the roadside. Moments later, the cab's headlights began rolling forward. At first, the witness thought the driver had forgotten to shift into park until the vehicle began gaining speed. The car picked up momentum down a steeper service incline, the hum of the engine rising as the wheels gripped the pavement. It accelerated straight toward the barrier. The sound of the impact carried through the block, followed by a brief silence. Then the hiss of escaping fuel. Flames appeared under the chassis within moments and spread quickly. By the time emergency crews reached the scene, flames had already taken over the front half of the cab. The fire burned hot against the concrete barrier, sending smoke into the night air. Inside, all 3 passengers were found still strapped in their seats. The rear doors were jammed from the collision, and investigators later confirmed the child locks had been engaged from the driver's panel, a common feature in older taxi models. Fire investigators determined the cab had been left in gear with the engine idling, the parking brake released just before it rolled down the incline. The impact speed was estimated at 50 to 55 miles per hour, enough to rupture the front fuel line and trigger a flash fire that consumed the vehicle within minutes. Raj Mehta was gone. His wallet, keys, and ID badge were discovered behind a dumpster nearby, but no trace of him turned up after that night. One blurry security video showed a man matching his build walking toward a bus stop just after the crash. Investigators reviewed his past complaints, linking them to the same group of teens found in the wreck. The case was ruled a suspected homicide, but Raj was never found. It was September 4th, 2018, in Lakeland, Florida. The summer heat still clung to the air as 55-year-old home nurse Melissa Crane parked outside a pale yellow house on Maplewood Drive. For 6 months, she'd been caring for 78-year-old Walter Beach, a retired mechanic recovering from heart surgery. To neighbors, their daily routine seemed steady. Melissa arriving each morning with her medical bag, leaving after sunset, always polite and punctual. Melissa had been a nurse for over 20 years, known for taking long-term assignments with elderly patients. Few people in Lakeland knew that her younger sister Dana had died in a hit-and-run accident 2 decades earlier on a county road outside Tampa. The driver had never been identified. Police closed the case for lack of evidence. Walter kept to himself, but sometimes drifted into talk when his medication made him drowsy. He often talked about the old days, mentioning cars he had fixed and nights he couldn't fully remember. Once, while Melissa organized his prescriptions, he mentioned driving a stretch of road past Clearwater years ago, then stopped mid-sentence and changed the subject. She thought little of it until one afternoon in August. She was sorting through boxes in Walter's storage room, looking for cleaning supplies, when she found a small plastic tub filled with old photos and newspaper clippings. One picture showed a wrecked sedan against a cypress tree. The license plate was gone, but the car model matched Dana's exactly. Beneath it was a clipping about an unresolved DUI crash from 20 years earlier. In the grainy photo that ran with the article, a small crowd stood behind police tape. Among them, slightly out of focus, was a younger Walter Beach. Melissa kept the discovery to herself. Co-workers later said she seemed quiet but composed, as though preoccupied. She continued her shifts without change, on time, polite, careful with every note she wrote. But over the next few weeks, Walter began to deteriorate. He reported dizziness, fainting, and heart palpitations. She logged it as expected cardiac fluctuation, though the symptoms didn't match the usual pattern. On the night of August 31st, Walter's neighbor saw him sitting upright in his recliner, the TV flickering. The next morning, she found him in the same position, unresponsive. Paramedics noted no sign of trauma. His pill organizer was empty. Toxicology revealed that Walter's medications had been swapped with incompatible prescriptions that caused progressive heart failure. Pharmacy logs confirmed Melissa had last handled his refills. By then, she was gone. Her apartment was cleaned out except for a single open suitcase and her nursing badge on the counter. A month later, a retired investigator revisiting the old DUI file found that Walter's name had once been listed as a possible witness, but records showed his car was serviced for front-end damage the same week of the crash. The accident had been Dana Crane's. Melissa Crane was never found. Walter's home sat empty for nearly a year before being sold. Neighbors said the porch light, once always on for the nurse's evening visits, stayed dark ever since. It was September 18th, 2015, when what appeared to be a tragic accident would later reveal itself as one of the most calculated acts of domestic revenge ever documented. Grant Harrison, a 42-year-old insurance adjuster known for his weekend grilling obsession, had no idea his wife Alara was planning his demise. The 38-year-old part-time bookkeeper had discovered Grant's year-long affair and his systematic draining of their joint savings to fund secret getaways. That evening, the couple prepared their suburban deck for a gathering. Grant insisted on repositioning their heavy gas grill to create more space. What he didn't know was that Alara had spent the previous week loosening the deck railing brackets, replacing original bolts with shorter ones that would fail under pressure. Alvin Pierce, their 62-year-old retired mailman neighbor, had noticed Alara making touch-ups to the deck rail. Mia Torres, a 24-year-old landscaper, had noted the rail's instability a week prior while trimming hedges. As Grant maneuvered the 80-pound grill toward the corner, he braced his hip against the top rail for leverage. The compromised section immediately gave way, creating a 6-foot gap. Grant's 190-pound frame tumbled 12 feet down from the raised second-story deck, his head striking the stone border below with devastating force. The impact fractured his skull and compressed his chest against the rocks. The grill tipped forward and slid through the opening, landing on Grant and adding crushing weight to his catastrophic injuries. His skull cracked on impact, causing catastrophic brain and chest injuries from which he never regained consciousness. Ilara screamed for help and called 911. Alvin rushed over, finding Grant motionless with blood pooling beneath his head. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, but Grant had already succumbed to traumatic brain injury and internal hemorrhaging. Initially ruled accidental, the case turned sinister when a municipal inspector noticed fresh tool marks on the separated brackets. Security footage captured Ilara working on the deck during Grant's absence. Forensic analysis later matched Ilara's tool marks and partial fingerprints to the modified bolts. Investigation revealed Ilara's discovery of Grant's infidelity through credit card statements, showing hotel charges for two. She had found evidence of $47,000 transferred from their joint account to Grant's personal account over 6 months. Text messages between Ilara and her sister revealed her growing rage and detailed revenge plans. One message chillingly stated that Grant would pay for his betrayal in the worst possible way. The prosecution argued that Ilara deliberately weakened the railing, knowing Grant's habit of leaning against it while grilling. She had calculated the exact pressure needed to cause failure while maintaining plausible deniability. During the trial, Alvin's testimony about the suspicious touch-ups and Mia's observation of the loose rail provided crucial evidence. Forensic analysis proved the tampering was intentional and recent. Ilara Harrison was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. The case became a textbook example of how domestic disputes can escalate into elaborate murder plots disguised as accidents. Grant's death serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous place isn't a dark alley, but your own backyard with someone you trusted most. It was June 22nd, 2016, when a scenic mountain overlook became the stage for one of the most vengeful acts of vehicular homicide ever recorded in Colorado. Holden Reed, a 35-year-old freelance graphic designer known for his calm demeanor and mountain photography, had arranged to meet his ex-girlfriend Indigo Frost at Devil's Curve. The 32-year-old real estate agent had been consumed with rage since their breakup 3 months earlier, blaming Holden for $23,000 in shared debts and public humiliation after he exposed her infidelity. Carla Nguyen, a 37-year-old road maintenance technician, had logged concerns about a compromised guardrail the previous month, but the report was filed away and never prioritized for repair. Nate Alvarez, a 29-year-old photographer positioned at an upper turnout, would provide the only witness account. Hikers had reported aggressive driving incidents near the same curve that week. The area's loose gravel shoulders created hazards that Indigo would exploit in her calculated revenge. Indigo had spent weeks planning, researching the weakened guardrail through public maintenance records. The breakup had devastated her life. Holden's revelation of her affair had cost her several listings and damaged her reputation. That evening, Holden's sedan approached where Indigo waited in her SUV. Phone records revealed she had been tracking his location, luring him there, claiming she wanted to return his belongings. As Holden slowed, Indigo accelerated aggressively, forcing him toward the compromised shoulder. His vehicle struck loose gravel at 35 miles per hour and, after a brief skid and impact from Indigo's SUV, surged to just over 40 miles per hour before he lost control. The car yawed toward the weakened guardrail, which deflected beyond its limits before failing completely. The barrier gave way as Holden's vehicle breached the edge into a ravine roughly 200 feet deep, filled with jagged rocks and pine trees. The vehicle rolled multiple times, each impact crushing the roof inward. A-pillars collapsed during the second roll. The third rotation flattened the driver's side. Holden sustained massive blunt force trauma as the car tumbled through brush and boulders. His skull fractured in multiple places, his chest cavity crushed, causing fatal internal bleeding and punctured lungs. Nate heard the impact and saw dust clouds rising. He called 911, providing GPS coordinates. His photographs captured the final moments and Indigo's SUV fleeing. Emergency responders accessed via a service road, but steep terrain complicated rescue efforts. They found Holden trapped in the compressed cabin with fatal injuries. Investigation initially focused on guardrail failure, but traffic cameras captured Indigo's aggressive pursuit. Her GPS data showed she had followed him for over an hour. Investigators discovered threatening texts Indigo sent to friends, describing fantasies about making Holden pay. One message mentioned the dangerous curves and how easy accidents could happen there. Indigo initially claimed she was nowhere near the mountain. However, her vehicle's GPS contradicted her story, showing she had driven the route multiple times before Holden's death. The prosecution argued Indigo orchestrated a vehicular ambush, using knowledge of road conditions and guardrail weakness to force Holden over the edge. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including matching tire marks, forensic analysts also identified paint transfer from Indigo's SUV on Holden's rear bumper, confirming contact before the crash. Indigo Frost pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter with aggravating intent and reckless endangerment. She received 15 years, with the judge noting the premeditated nature of her actions. Holden's death serves as a chilling reminder of how intimate knowledge and burning resentment can transform familiar places into deadly traps. It was January 11th, 2017, when what appeared to be a tragic workplace accident would later expose one of the most calculated acts of revenge ever committed in an industrial setting. Kellen Beckett, a 28-year-old inventory specialist known for his meticulous attention to safety protocols, had recently filed a complaint that would cost his life. Rowan Asher, a 34-year-old forklift operator with a volatile temper, had been seething after Kellen's complaint resulted in reduced hours and pending discipline. That morning, both men were assigned to reconcile inventory in aisle 4 of the distribution center. The corridor housed towering pallet racks stretching 30 feet high, loaded with heavy crates. Denise Holt, a 45-year-old shift supervisor, had previously flagged uneven stacking as hazardous. Omar Ruiz, a 33-year-old security guard, performed routine hourly walkthroughs that would later provide crucial timeline evidence. The warehouse had structural issues, including floor undulation near a drainage line awaiting repair. Unknown to Kellen, Rowan had spent the previous evening deliberately disturbing the storage configuration. Using his forklift access and knowledge of load distribution, he strategically loosened support connections and repositioned heavy crates to create an unstable domino effect. As Kellen walked beneath the high bay section, updating his scanner, Rowan triggered the collapse he had orchestrated. A critical support beam shifted laterally, causing massive crates to slide forward and strike a mid-level beam, redirecting tremendous force downward. The cascading failure propagated along several bays as connections snapped in rapid succession. Multiple containers, each weighing over 500 pounds, fell in a thunderous avalanche. A massive crate struck Kellen directly, driving him to the concrete floor. The primary impact crushed his thoracic cavity, fracturing multiple ribs and causing immediate internal bleeding. A second crate landed across his pelvis, causing devastating fractures and trapping him beneath debris. His breathing became labored as his punctured lungs filled with blood. Autopsy later confirmed traumatic asphyxia, marked by chest compression injuries, petechial hemorrhages, and massive internal bleeding. Denise heard the crash and activated the emergency alarm, directing evacuation of adjacent aisles. Omar rushed to the scene, using a pallet jack to clear lighter debris, desperately trying to reach Kellen. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but had to stabilize the remaining structure before attempting extraction. When paramedics finally reached him, Kellen had succumbed to traumatic asphyxia and massive internal hemorrhaging. Security cameras revealed suspicious activity in aisle 4 the previous evening. Footage showed Rowan making unauthorized adjustments to rack configurations after his shift ended, using an access card he was no longer cleared to have. Tool access logs indicated he had checked out maintenance equipment despite having no work orders. A structural engineer reconstructed the racking failure sequence, confirming deliberate misalignment of load-bearing supports. Investigation revealed Rowan's deep resentment toward Kellen. Co-workers described escalating arguments about safety procedures, and several recalled hearing Rowan make veiled threats toward him. The prosecution argued that Rowan used his knowledge of warehouse operations to create a death trap. His deliberate manipulation of load-bearing elements demonstrated clear premeditation. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Rowan Asher was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 25-year sentence with additional civil penalties. Kellen's death serves as a stark reminder that workplace disputes can escalate into deadly revenge when combined with intimate knowledge of industrial hazards. It was August 5th, 2017, when what appeared to be a tragic boating accident at a city marina would later reveal itself as one of the most sinister acts of maritime revenge ever documented. Lux Sinclair, a 31-year-old marine insurance adjuster known for his cautious nature and boat safety knowledge, had arranged to meet his ex-girlfriend Savannah Lee at the Outer Finger Docks to discuss their shared vessel. Savannah Lee, a 29-year-old yacht broker with a vindictive personality, had been consumed with rage since their bitter breakup 6 months earlier over a jointly owned sailboat worth $85,000. The marina's outer docks were known for challenging conditions during evening hours when boat traffic created dangerous wake patterns. Theo Briggs, a 58-year-old dockhand, had reported a sticky gate latch the previous week. Arya Patel, a 26-year-old harbor office assistant, had logged the after-hours access request. Savannah had spent weeks studying the marina's layout, tide schedules, and traffic patterns. Her yacht brokerage background gave her knowledge of how wake action could create deadly situations between hulls and docks. As dusk approached, Lux arrived at the slip where their 32-foot sailboat was moored. Savannah had arrived earlier and made deadly modifications to the mooring setup, loosening dock lines and repositioning fenders to create gaps. Most critically, she arranged a trailing line to create an entanglement hazard. When Lux stepped from the dock to the swim platform to adjust the stern line, Savannah's trap activated. A passing charter boat created a wake that lifted the stern and narrowed the gap. The platform rose and shifted laterally, exactly as calculated. Lux's foot slipped on the wet surface, and one leg entered the gap as the hull pressed against the dock edge. The trailing line immediately snagged around his calf, restricting movement as the boat rebounded. The hull compressed intermittently against the dock edge during wake cycles, causing repeated blunt impacts to Lux's lower torso and thigh. Each wave cycle brought the heavy fiberglass hull crushing against his trapped leg with thousands of pounds of force. Unable to free himself, Lux slipped into the water between boat and dock. The entrapment persisted, preventing him from surfacing effectively. He sustained severe contusions, a suspected tibia-fibula fracture, an increasingly ineffective respiratory effort as he struggled underwater. Autopsy confirmed drowning with diatom evidence in the lungs and bloodstream, consistent with live submersion. Savannah yelled for help, bringing Theo running with flotation equipment. Emergency responders worked frantically to cut the fouled line, but Lux had already succumbed to drowning with contributing blunt trauma. Marina security cameras captured Savannah's earlier arrival and suspicious activity around the mooring lines. Access logs confirmed she had requested after-hours access, claiming she needed personal items. Forensic technicians also recovered Savannah's fingerprints and fresh fiber residue on the adjusted lines. Investigation revealed Savannah's extensive planning. Her computer showed research into tide tables and traffic patterns, along with notes about dock configurations and mooring tension points. Coast Guard marine safety officers assisted local police in reconstructing the sequence, citing deliberate interference with the mooring systems. Witnesses and colleagues later described her growing resentment over the boat dispute, noting that she often spoke bitterly about Lux and their unresolved ownership fight. The prosecution argued that Savannah used her professional knowledge to create a death trap, exploiting natural hazards against Lux. Her deliberate manipulation demonstrated clear premeditation. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Savannah Lee was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 20-year sentence. The tragic end of Lux Sinclair stands as a stark warning that familiarity breeds the deadliest form of danger, when someone who knows your world inside and out decides to turn that knowledge against you. It was March 27, 2018, when what appeared to be a tragic industrial accident at a county fairground would later expose one of the most calculated acts of workplace revenge ever documented. Corbin Wilder, a 33-year-old equipment technician known for his commitment to safety protocols, had volunteered to stay after closing to assist with teardown. Penn Foster, a 41-year-old crane operator with a volatile temper, had been seething since Corbin publicly criticized his competence during a previous operation. The fairgrounds equipment yard was filled with heavy machinery and disassembled ride components. Lila Monroe, a 41-year-old rigging contractor, had posted reminders about securing counterweights before lifting operations. Eddie Park, a 39-year-old food vendor, had lingered to offer assistance. The evening's work involved moving heavy ride components using a mobile crane. A wind advisory noted intermittent gusts up to 25 miles per hour, creating additional challenges for precision lifting. Unknown to Corbin, Penn had deliberately failed to secure key locking pins in the crane's counterweight assembly, rendering it unstable during slewing. His knowledge allowed him to create a scenario that would appear accidental while ensuring maximum lethality. As the lifting operation began, Penn initiated the boom's slewing motion. The massive counterweight, weighing over 8,000 pounds, began to swing unexpectedly due to the incomplete retention Penn had sabotaged. A sudden wind gust altered the swing arc of the unsecured counterweight, transforming it into a deadly pendulum that traversed the staging area with devastating force. Corbin, communicating with another worker near the trailer, stepped directly into the swing path of the counterweight. His focus on coordinating the load made him unaware of the approaching danger. The 8,000-pound counterweight struck Corbin at chest height with the force of a wrecking ball, projecting his frame across the staging area onto the compacted gravel surface. The massive blow instantly crushed Corbin's thoracic cavity, fracturing multiple ribs and causing his chest wall to collapse inward. His sternum shattered from the direct impact, while his heart and lungs sustained catastrophic damage. Penn immediately initiated an emergency stop, while Lila rushed to stabilize the counterweight. Eddie sprinted to Corbin's motionless form, calling 911. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, but Corbin's injuries were beyond survival. Paramedics found him with absent vital signs and evidence of massive internal trauma. Investigation revealed crane telemetry data showing suspicious patterns in the counterweight retention systems. Engineers reviewing telemetry noted abrupt, unexplained shifts in counterweight balance, inconsistent with normal operation. Radio recordings captured tense exchanges between Penn and Corbin about proper procedures. Penn had accessed the crane's counterweight assembly during his dinner break, using tools not required for his tasks. Security footage showed him working alone on retention mechanisms for over 20 minutes. Co-workers later told investigators that Penn had made dark remarks about how easily accidents could happen around cranes and counterweights. And several recalled hearing him joke that one mistake at the wrong time could end a person's life. The prosecution argued Penn used his crane operator expertise to create a death trap, deliberately compromising safety systems. Equipment analysis confirmed the retention failure was due to deliberate sabotage. OSHA investigators concluded that the retention failure resulted from intentional tampering rather than equipment fatigue. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including telemetry data, radio recordings, and digital communications, Penn Foster was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 25-year sentence. Corbin's death led to enhanced safety protocols, including mandatory double verification of retention systems and expanded exclusion zones during crane operations. It was November 3, 2016, when what appeared to be a tragic hiking accident at a coastal cliff overlook would later reveal itself as one of the most sinister acts of revenge disguised as nature's cruelty. Briar Wells, a 27-year-old freelance nature photographer known for her adventurous spirit, had arranged to meet her former business partner, Zoe Carmichael, at the remote overlook to photograph migrating seabirds. Zoe Carmichael, a 30-year-old marketing consultant with a vindictive personality, had been consumed with rage since their business partnership dissolved 6 months earlier over accusations that Briar stole her original photography concept. The coastal cliff trail was notorious for unstable edges, made worse by recent storms that had undercut portions of the bluff. Hank Duran, a 54-year-old park ranger, had posted temporary erosion warnings following the damage. Lin Vo, a 31-year-old dedicated bird watcher, had been documenting frequent rockfall sounds on volunteer report forms that would later provide crucial evidence. The meeting was ostensibly about returning shared photography equipment, but Zoe had spent weeks researching the cliff's geological instability, studying erosion reports, and identifying the most dangerous sections. Recent storms had severely undercut the bluff, creating hidden fracture lines invisible from the surface, but making the edge extremely unstable. As the afternoon progressed, Briar set up her equipment near the official viewing area. Zoe began steering their conversation toward a narrow, unofficial path that extended beyond posted safety signage. Using knowledge of Briar's competitive nature, Zoe suggested the rock arch would provide a spectacular backdrop, emphasizing how the dramatic angle would set Briar's work apart. Briar, focused on capturing the perfect shot, stepped onto the narrow, unofficial path to angle her camera toward the rock arch formation. The seemingly solid ground was actually a thin layer covering a significant void created by erosion. The cliff face gave way along a concealed fracture beneath the surface crust, sending Briar plunging toward the rocks below. She attempted to regain footing on loose scree, but the unstable material provided no purchase. The descent included multiple impacts on protruding rock ledges, each collision causing severe blunt force trauma. Her camera equipment scattered during the fall, tumbling alongside her toward the rocky shoreline below. Autopsy later documented catastrophic injuries consistent with an 80-foot fall, including multiple skull fractures, spinal compression, and internal bleeding from rib fractures that punctured vital organs. Zoe screamed for help and called emergency services. Hank responded with rescue equipment, but the remote terrain and rough surf delayed extraction efforts. It took over an hour for rescue teams to reach Briar's position, and by then, the combination of traumatic injuries and exposure had proven fatal. Digital correspondence later confirmed Zoe's weeks of preparation, including her review of Park Service reports that identified erosion-prone sections. Forensic geotechnical specialists matched fresh soil displacement and overlapping boot prints near the fracture zone, confirming that both women had been at the unstable edge moments before the collapse. The prosecution argued that Zoe deliberately guided Briar to the most dangerous section, using knowledge of terrain instability and Briar's professional ambitions to create a deadly scenario. Faced with overwhelming digital evidence, Zoe Carmichael was convicted of manslaughter and received a 10-year sentence. The fatal fall of Briar Wells demonstrates how even the most scenic locations can be transformed into killing grounds by someone who understands both the terrain and their victims' vulnerabilities. It was August 12, 2016, in Detroit, Michigan. The night was thick with summer humidity and the low rumble of engines outside a boxing club. The last card had ended hours earlier, but the tension in the air hadn't cooled. Marcus Mac DeLeon was 28, an amateur boxer with more anger than discipline. He worked delivery shifts for a courier service, scraping together entry fees for local bouts. His coaches said he had raw power, but no control, in or out of the ring. His main fixation was Terrence Cole, a calm, methodical fighter who had beaten him cleanly on points just a week earlier. The loss festered. Mac told friends that Cole's post-fight grin was straight-up disrespect, that he needed to set the record straight. Detroit's club circuit was a mix of pride and small-time chaos. Fighters like Mac were half promoted by local gyms and half managed by their own bravado. The East Side Club's rear alley was a known hangout. Dim lighting, a dumpster, and a narrow exit to the street. That Friday, Terrence had another match on the same card, an exhibition meant to showcase his technique before a regional tournament. Mac wasn't on the roster. He showed up anyway, slipping through the crowd near the back with a hooded sweatshirt and his phone in his pocket. Around midnight, Terrence left through the side door with his trainer and a few friends, laughing as they reviewed the match. CCTV footage later showed Mac emerging seconds after. He crossed the lot fast. Witnesses said he shouted first, something about respect, about being set up. Terrence turned, calm but tired, gesturing toward his trainer as if to walk away. The footage caught the flash of a shove, then a blur of movement. Moments later, Terrence stumbled backward, clutching his side. Mac's arm moved again, deliberate and fast, before he backed away. Breathing hard, knife visible in his hand, Terrence collapsed beside the dumpster. His friends screamed for help while Mac disappeared into the dark. A bystander called 911 within 90 seconds of the fight ending. Police arrived within minutes. Terrence was still conscious when paramedics reached him, able to answer briefly before losing consciousness. But his condition deteriorated en route to Detroit Receiving Hospital. He was pronounced dead less than an hour later from massive internal bleeding. Investigators pieced the sequence together quickly. Security footage, multiple phone videos, and witness statements left little room for ambiguity. Mac's car was found abandoned 2 miles away. A search of his apartment revealed clothing with blood traces matching Terrence's DNA. The weapon, a folding knife, was recovered from a storm drain near the club. Mac was arrested at a cousin's house 2 days later without resistance. During interrogation, he claimed self-defense, but evidence contradicted him. The knife wounds were angled downward, consistent with aggression. Surveillance timestamps matched witness accounts to the second. At trial, prosecutors framed the killing as an escalation of obsession and humiliation. The defense called it a tragic street misunderstanding. Court transcripts showed Mac expressing regret, but never admitting intent. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting Mac DeLeon of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in state prison. It was June 9, 2017, in Barcelona, Spain. The evening light fell softly over Plaza de la Vila. Crowds moved lazily between cafes and tram stops. No one noticed the man in the dark jacket at first, watching from the far side of the square, his stillness breaking the rhythm of the city. Marta Ruiz was 26, a language instructor at a small private academy in Gracia. Her work was steady, her students liked her, and she supplemented her modest income by tutoring tourists who wanted to sound local. She posted about everything: the best neighborhood bakeries, weekend hikes, exhibitions at the Museo Picasso. Her tone was warm and unguarded, the kind of friendliness that drew strangers easily. Among her followers was Raul Vendrell, a 29-year-old warehouse clerk. He lived alone in a small flat and worked night shifts, managing freight inventory for a shipping company. He rarely spoke to co-workers. What began as casual interest in Marta's posts became routine, then fixation. Each photo and caption seemed to him a message. Her meals, her gym sessions, even a brief mention of a new boyfriend triggered something sharp and restless in him. Raul studied the timing of her uploads, mapped her locations, and began frequenting the places she tagged. Marta blocked one of his accounts, forcing him to create alternate ones. That week, Marta had finished her spring term at the academy and met friends for dinner at a cafe near Plaza de la Vila. It was a mild evening, damp after light rain. Around 8 p.m., she said her goodbyes, shouldered her small purse, and walked toward her usual bus stop. Security footage later confirmed she lingered by the square fountain to check her phone before heading down Carrer de Sant Josep Oriol. Footage from a nearby cafe's security camera later captured another figure appearing moments later, matching Raul's build and gait. In the following minute of footage, Marta is seen adjusting her hair, unaware of the man closing in from behind. Witnesses later described hearing 2 sharp cracks, metallic, distinct from the street noise. Marta dropped immediately, collapsing onto the stone walkway near the fountain's rim. One round entered through her upper back, another through the left side of her neck, both fired from close range. Panic spread instantly as cafe patrons screamed and ducked for cover. The gunman stood over her briefly, motionless, then turned and walked swiftly toward the nearest alley. A street musician nearby ran for help. Police arrived within 4 minutes. Marta was found with faint pulse but severe blood loss. Paramedics worked to stabilize her before transport, but she was pronounced dead upon arrival at Hospital de Saint Pau. Traffic cameras and toll data tracked Raul's movements that night. He drove south toward his apartment near the industrial district, parked in the lot, and did not re-emerge. The next morning, his body was found hanging from a ceiling beam. Inside his flat, investigators found the handgun, later identified as a .32 caliber revolver. The weapon was unregistered and believed to have been purchased through an illegal private sale several months earlier. His laptop was also open on Marta's social media page. Files recovered from his hard drive included hundreds of saved images, location logs, and months of unsent letters addressed to her. A document titled "She Chose Wrong" outlined the sequence of the attack and his planned suicide. Police ruled the case a premeditated murder-suicide fueled by digital obsession and social fixation. Local authorities issued a statement urging caution over online exposure and routine sharing of personal information. The language school held a brief memorial, closing for 2 days. Marta Ruiz was buried in Montjuic Cemetery under a gray sky, her students leaving small folded notes in place of flowers. It was March 22nd, 2015, in a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Nottinghamshire, England. By mid-morning, that silence would be broken by a single, dull explosion that shattered the calm and left a neighborhood staring at a blackened doorway. Helen Barrett was 52, a longtime resident of the estate and a part-time administrative clerk at a dental practice in nearby Newark. Her life had been quietly unraveling for nearly a year. After a messy separation from her ex-partner, Paul Barrett, she'd become entangled in custody disputes over shared property and finances. Neighbors described her as tense but polite, often stepping outside to smoke on the porch during calls that ended with slamming doors or raised voices. Paul, 54, had once worked as an electrician, but after the breakup, he drifted between odd jobs, showing up unannounced to argue or collect what he claimed was his. The separation grew into an escalating feud, marked by restraining orders and repeated police visits. The Barrett home was typical for the area. 2 stories, gas heating, and a small back garden bordered by hedges. Helen had recently complained about strange disturbances behind the property, lights flickering, the faint smell of gas near the kitchen vent, and footprints by the back fence. She mentioned these to friends and to local police, but nothing came of it. 2 days before the incident, she told a co-worker she thought Paul had been near the back of the house again. Their initial assumption was paranoia. That Sunday began uneventfully. Around 8:15 a.m., rain was falling lightly. Visibility was poor. Helen was likely in the kitchen, making tea or checking her phone. Forensic analysis would later suggest that someone had entered the rear garden, removed the access panel to the property's exterior gas meter box using a wrench or meter key, and interfered with the valve controlling flow to the internal system. The result was a slow, steady release of natural gas into the lower rooms. With the windows closed against the damp morning, the mixture thickened unnoticed. By 8:47 a.m., a spark from a light switch or the refrigerator's compressor relay triggered ignition. The pressure wave ripped through the kitchen and front hallway, blowing the front door off its hinges and sending fragments of glass and insulation across the street. The blast wasn't large enough to level the house, but strong enough to cause fatal internal injuries. A neighbor, stepping out for a newspaper, heard the boom and saw the front window collapse outward in a plume of smoke. Fire crews arrived within 10 minutes. Helen was found near the hallway, likely moving toward the door when the explosion occurred. Helen Barrett was pronounced dead at the scene once fire crews confirmed the property was safe for paramedics to enter. She had suffered massive internal trauma and burns consistent with close-range blast exposure. Fire investigators determined there were no signs of accelerant or electrical malfunction. The focus quickly shifted to the gas system. The main valve showed wrench marks, inconsistent with normal use, and residue of disturbed soil suggested recent tampering. CCTV footage from nearby homes captured Paul's car leaving the area less than 15 minutes before the blast. When police traced his movements, they found internet searches on his phone regarding gas pressure control and ignition times. A recorded call to a friend the previous week mentioned scaring her a bit, so she'll move out. During questioning, Paul denied intent to kill, claiming only to have wanted to cause damage. Forensic and digital evidence contradicted him. The prosecution argued the act was deliberate sabotage. The court, while accepting that murder was not proven, found him guilty of manslaughter due to reckless endangerment. He received a 17-year prison sentence. It was April 12, 2018, in Phoenix, Arizona. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the strip mall parking lot off 7th Street, where commuters drifted in and out of convenience stores, fast food chains, and small offices. It was an ordinary weekday scene, unremarkable, quiet. But beneath the surface, resentment and humiliation had been simmering for months, waiting for a chance to ignite. Samuel Ortega, 34, worked as a freelance graphic designer from a rented apartment downtown. He made a modest living producing branding kits and social media layouts for small businesses across the Phoenix area. He'd built a reputation for being sharp, reliable, and outspoken online, traits that helped attract clients but also made him confrontational in local digital circles. Among those he crossed paths with was Victor Salas, 52, who owned a small print and souvenir shop not far from Samuel's usual haunts. Their conflict began over a failed project inquiry, but turned personal after Samuel mocked Victor's poorly written messages and thinly veiled harassment. Samuel's decision to post screenshots of those exchanges, captioned with biting commentary, spread quickly in local business groups. The post branded Victor as the creep from 7th Street. Within days, his shop's online reviews plummeted. He lost walk-ins, faced refunds, and grew increasingly paranoid that people recognized him. While Samuel moved on to new clients, Victor stewed in humiliation. His Facebook posts became erratic, rants about fake professionals and cowards hiding behind screens. For those around him, it looked like a man unraveling. That Friday afternoon, Samuel had arranged to meet a small business owner at the strip mall cafe to discuss a rebranding project. He posted about the meeting location publicly, tagging the cafe's name for exposure. Victor saw it within minutes. According to GPS data later retrieved from his truck, he left his shop less than 10 minutes after viewing the post. Samuel, unaware, had already finished the meeting and was loading his portfolio case into his compact hatchback. Security footage later showed Victor walking briskly toward him, gesturing with one hand, his other concealed near his waistband. The audio-less video captured a brief exchange, Samuel turning, arms slightly raised in a dismissive motion. Several witnesses described hearing one short argument, then a single gunshot that echoed across the parking lot. Samuel fell immediately, clutching his chest. Witnesses described a small caliber handgun, likely a .380 or 9mm pistol, consistent with the shell casing recovered at the scene. Victor returned to his truck immediately and drove away. A store employee who rushed outside found him unresponsive within a minute. Paramedics called by a bystander arrived quickly, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. The bullet entered Samuel's chest at a downward angle, penetrating his left lung. Detectives secured the scene within 20 minutes, recovering the casing, a single slug from the pavement, and multiple cell phone recordings from nearby witnesses. Police located Victor at his residence just before midnight. The gun was still in his vehicle, one round missing from the magazine. During questioning, he admitted to confronting Samuel but claimed the shooting was accidental. He failed a gunshot residue test, and ballistic comparison later confirmed the recovered slug matched his firearm. At trial, prosecutors presented a clear timeline supported by digital evidence and surveillance footage. The defense argued provocation, citing months of public ridicule. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Victor Salas guilty of second-degree murder. He received a 28-year sentence without parole. The strip mall where the shooting occurred quietly replaced its lot cameras with newer, high-resolution models. For Samuel's clients and colleagues, his death became a cautionary story about online escalation. It was November 14, 2016, in Marseille, France. The narrow streets of the 6th arrondissement were unusually still, the smell of rain mixing with faint traces of yeast from the bakeries that defined the block. By dawn, that atmosphere would be gone, replaced by the flash of sirens and the scorched smell of fuel. Julien Mercier, 22, had been working at La Petite Brioche for just 6 months. He was quiet, careful, and often volunteered to stay late cleaning the proofers and kneading tables so the early team could start on time. He rented a modest apartment nearby and was known for saving nearly every euro for culinary school. His employer, Jean-Paul Martin, was respected for his skill, but infamous for his temper, especially toward Claude Morel, who owned the pastry shop next door. The two men had competed for customers for years, their feud extending from whispered complaints to public insults online. Julien avoided it, seeing himself as an employee, not a participant in the rivalry. Baking was physically demanding. Long hours, heat, and exact timing. Each night, Julien worked through rising temperatures and the low hum of industrial mixers, relying on routine and caution. The two shops shared a narrow service alley used for deliveries and trash disposal, lined with cardboard, flour bags, and empty crates. It wasn't unsafe, but the proximity meant that one accident could affect both establishments. Still, no one expected danger from outside. That Monday, Jean-Paul's frustration reached its peak. Days earlier, Claude had accused him of tax fraud publicly, embarrassing him before suppliers. Jean-Paul ranted to colleagues, threatening vague retaliation. Late that night, after locking up, Jean-Paul filled a fuel can from his garage, convinced that burning a few boxes behind Claude's store would send a message. He didn't know that Claude had asked Julien to stop by his bakery to help prep pastry dough for an early catering order. From reconstructed evidence, around midnight, Jean-Paul walked through the alley wearing gloves and a hooded jacket. He crouched at the rear entrance of Claude's pastry shop, poured accelerant over stacked cardboard, and struck a lighter. The fire ignited faster than he expected, feeding on the dry paper and plastic crates. Within seconds, it climbed the wall and flashed upward under the awning, creating a sudden surge of radiant heat. Jean-Paul fled immediately. Inside, Julien was rinsing trays when the lights flickered and smoke began seeping through the back door. He likely moved to investigate, but was met with a burst of superheated air from a flashover near the doorway. Two residents across the street reported seeing him at a side window, pounding against the glass as the interior filled with smoke. A neighbor's emergency call brought firefighters to the scene by 12:09 a.m., finding the structure engulfed. When they breached the rear, they discovered Julien collapsed near the exit, overcome by carbon monoxide. His burns were minimal, indicating death by asphyxiation. Forensic investigators recovered melted plastic traces consistent with fuel residue at the origin point. Security footage confirmed the masked arsonist's route, matching the frame of Jean-Paul's build. When questioned, he denied involvement, but later confessed after residue from the same accelerant was found on his gloves and jacket at home. In court, prosecutors demonstrated that while intent to kill was not proven, the deliberate ignition of flammable material caused a death. Jean-Paul Martin was convicted of involuntary homicide and aggravated arson, receiving an 18-year prison sentence. Julien's funeral was held quietly in his hometown of Avignon, attended by family, colleagues, and the few neighbors who knew him. The incident led to expanded fire safety inspections of small food businesses across Marseille, a silent acknowledgement that negligence and anger can burn far beyond their aim. It was August 22, 2015, in Cordoba, Argentina. The city was quieting after a humid Saturday. the kind of late winter evening when families filled roadside cafes before heading home. Streetlights blinked on along Avenida Rafael Núñez, illuminating the rows of parked cars and slow weekend traffic. Among them was a silver Renault Scenic, freshly serviced, its driver unaware that something beneath its frame had been left fatally altered. Diego Alvarez, 42, ran a small hardware store in the Northern District. Known among friends as reliable and even-tempered, he balanced long work hours with coaching his son's youth soccer team on weekends. His life was defined by routine, steady work, steady income, and predictable commutes. He trusted local tradesmen and rarely questioned mechanical work, preferring to keep good relations with neighborhood service providers. That habit led him to a small repair shop managed by Rafael Delgado, a mechanic with a reputation for skill but an equally strong temper. Vehicles like Diego's Scenic required regular wheel alignment and hub checks due to the uneven road surfaces common around Cordoba's outskirts. It was standard service: removal, cleaning, torquing, and reseating of wheel nuts on fixed studs. The process demanded precision, but not specialized tools. On paper, there was nothing inherently dangerous about a routine service. But in mechanical systems, a single nut torqued incorrectly could turn a car into a weapon against itself. That week, Diego brought the car in for a brake inspection and tire rotation. When Rafael issued an inflated bill, Diego confronted him over what he called double charging. Witnesses recalled raised voices and Rafael pacing outside the office later that day. Surveillance from a nearby warehouse, later retrieved by investigators, captured Rafael returning to the yard after closing. He lingered near Diego's parked vehicle for several minutes, appearing to work on something near the front wheel before walking away. The following afternoon, Diego picked up the car, paid reluctantly, and tried to drive home. At 6:43 p.m., a municipal dashcam positioned along Avenida Gauss captured the moment everything went wrong. Diego's car drifted slightly right, corrected, then suddenly lurched left. The front wheel detached cleanly from the hub, bouncing ahead as the chassis dug into the pavement. The vehicle rolled once, striking a lamppost and landing on its roof. Witnesses rushed from nearby vehicles. Two men broke the passenger window and cut the seatbelt. Diego was semi-conscious, but pinned against the steering column. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but he succumbed to chest trauma before reaching the hospital. Police impounded the wreck and began a technical inspection. Mechanics documented cross-threaded and partially loosened wheel nuts, inconsistent torque pressure, and distinct tool markings suggesting deliberate tampering. Microscopic residue from the wheel studs matched traces found on gloves Rafael was using. When confronted, Rafael claimed sabotage by another worker, but forensic alignment between his wrench set and the damage pattern closed the case. Rafael Delgado was charged with aggravated homicide and found guilty. Prosecutors cited motive, opportunity, and physical evidence showing calculated tampering. He received a 23-year sentence. Diego's widow petitioned the provincial legislature for mandatory surveillance in licensed garages, a measure proposed later that year and enacted the following spring. Today, most workshops in Cordoba operate under continuous camera coverage, a direct result of a tragedy that began with pride, ended in negligence, and cost a family its center. It was March 3, 2016, in Helsinki, Finland, and the winter evening was quiet. The streets were damp from melting snow, and neon signs reflected off the wet pavement. In the Kallio district, a small fitness center was closing for the night. Jukka Lehtinen, a 52-year-old gym owner known for strict discipline, had spent decades in the fitness business. He was tough on his staff and often called out their mistakes in front of members. His style was old school and unforgiving. A few weeks earlier, he had a heated clash with one of his trainers, Kari Niemi. During a busy session, Jukka accused him of being careless with equipment and unprofessional with clients. He raised his voice and pointed his finger while members watched from nearby machines. The confrontation embarrassed Kari in front of everyone. His face flushed red as he tore off his staff shirt and walked out. He left the gym that day and told others he would never forgive Jukka for what had happened. Jukka followed the same routine every night, and Kari knew it well. After the last members left, Juka always ended his shift with a solo sauna session. Same pattern, same time, like clockwork. Kari still had a spare key that he never returned. One evening, he slipped inside after hours. The gym was empty and silent. He moved to the sauna's control box and disabled the automatic shutoff that kept the heat from climbing too high. Then he wedged the outside latch with a metal shim so the door could not be opened from inside. He tested it once to make sure it held. Satisfied, he left quietly through the back exit. The following night, Juka followed his routine. Around 10 p.m., he walked through the locker room with a towel over his shoulder and stepped into the sauna. A cleaner sweeping the hall noticed him enter. At first, nothing seemed wrong. 10 minutes later, the cleaner walked past again and paused. Thick steam was rolling under the door. From inside came dull thumps, heavy and uneven. The cleaner thought Juka was shifting on the bench or tossing water onto the hot rocks, but the sound sharpened like fists striking wood. He called out but got no response. The cleaner tugged at the handle, but the latch would not move. It felt jammed tight. Worried, he rushed to the supply closet and grabbed a metal bar used for weight racks. His hands shook as he searched through the shelves. By the time he returned with another staff member, the pounding had stopped. Together, they forced the latch open. The door groaned and then swung outward. A wave of heat surged into the hall, thick and choking. Inside, the benches were soaked. Steam clung to every surface, and the air burned to breathe. Juka was collapsed on the middle bench, motionless. His skin was flushed a deep red, and his towel was darkened at the edges. Later checks showed the sauna had climbed past 220 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond safe limits. The cleaner backed away in shock. The room was so hot that they could not stand inside for more than a few seconds. What was once a place of calm had turned into a furnace. Investigators arrived later that night. They found the safety timer had been tampered with and the latch jammed from the outside. It was not a simple malfunction. Someone had prepared the trap. Tool marks on the control box matched wrenches missing from the locker Kari Niemi once used, and his spare key was recovered during a search of his apartment. He was arrested within days, and the case was ruled a calculated act of revenge. The gym closed for a week. Members spoke in hushed voices about the owner who lost his life in the very place he trusted most. It was September 12, 2015, in Tuscany, Italy, and the hillsides were quiet as evening settled. The air was heavy with the smell of grapes during harvest season. On the edge of Chianti country, a small vineyard was prepared for another long night of work. Running this estate was Paolo Ricci, a 61-year-old co-owner who had spent his life building the family business. Paolo was known for his sharp business sense and stubborn decisions. He ran the vineyard with an iron grip and rarely backed down from a fight. Earlier that year, he forced his cousin, Marco Ricci, out of the partnership after a bitter dispute over finances. Paolo claimed Marco had been mismanaging funds and making poor choices that hurt the business. Many workers whispered that Marco had taken the loss hard. For decades, he had labored in the same fields alongside Paolo, only to watch his name removed from contracts and his influence stripped away. He rarely spoke to the family after the split, but people noticed him walking the edge of the vineyard rows more than once, watching in silence from a distance. Marco knew the property better than anyone. He also knew the dangers inside the underground wine cellar. The sealed stone room held fermenting barrels that released carbon dioxide, a gas heavier than air. If trapped inside without proper ventilation, the buildup could suffocate a person within minutes. Marco had helped design the cellar years earlier, and he remembered every latch, every vent, and every corner. That knowledge became the center of his plan for revenge. On a late summer evening, Marco returned to the estate under the cover of darkness. The harvest kept everyone distracted in the fields, their voices carrying across the rows. He carried a small tube of industrial glue and slipped into the cellar corridor. The heavy oak door had a simple latch, one that could be sealed quickly by forcing a thin bead of glue directly into the mechanism. He coated it carefully, working slowly to avoid making noise. Then he waited for his chance. That night, Marco approached Paolo with a calm suggestion. The barrels, he said, might be over-fermenting. He urged Paolo to check them before morning or risk losing an entire batch. To a man like Paolo, whose pride rested on the quality of his wine, such a warning could not be ignored. Paolo trusted his own judgment above all and decided to inspect the cellar himself. A field hand later recalled seeing Paolo descend into the cellar around midnight, a lantern in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The worker thought nothing of it until some time passed and faint banging came from behind the door. The sound was weak as though muffled by thick stone walls. When the worker tried the latch, it refused to turn. It was stuck solid. The worker called for help. Others arrived and tried forcing the door, but the latch would not budge. The banging grew less frequent, then stopped. No one knew how long Paolo had struggled inside, surrounded by the invisible gas rising from the barrels. The lantern's glow faded until the cellar returned to silence. By dawn, worried workers gathered in the corridor. They pried at the latch with iron bars until the door splintered open. A rush of stale air spilled out. Inside, Paolo was slumped against the largest barrel, his lantern cold beside him. The air smelled strongly of fermenting grapes, sharp and suffocating. His face was drained of color, his body still. Investigators found the latch had been glued to the mechanism. Traces of the same industrial adhesive were traced to a tube Marco purchased in Siena weeks earlier, and a partial fingerprint in the dried glue matched his record. Confronted with the evidence, Marco admitted he had prepared the trap. He was arrested, and the case was ruled an act of revenge carried out with knowledge only a vintner could possess. The vineyard never stopped. Harvest continued that same week, though workers moved through the rows in silence. For them, the vines were no longer just a source of wine, but a reminder of how one family feud had ended in calculated death. It was July 18th, 2018, in Singapore, and the night air was warm and heavy. Rain from earlier in the evening still clung to the streets, and the glow from streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. At the edge of the central district, the main city library was winding down for the day. Running this busy facility was Daniel Wong, a 44-year-old head librarian known for being methodical, keeping the building's operations running with strict routines and careful oversight. Earlier that year, safety checks revealed repeated problems with the elevators and other systems. The library's maintenance supervisor, Lee Han, had been warned several times to keep up with inspections, but failed to file reports on time. After several missed deadlines, Daniel dismissed him from his position. Lee left the job quietly, but he carried years of technical knowledge of the building and a growing resentment toward the man who had forced him out. Lee knew the library building better than anyone. For years, he had handled its mechanical systems, including the service elevators used by staff to move supplies between floors. He knew every override panel, every interlock, and every shut-off switch hidden in the service corridors. He understood how the safety systems worked and how they could be disabled. Losing his job did not take away that knowledge, and it was that knowledge he would later use for revenge. On a quiet evening, weeks later, Lee entered the library's service area after hours. Using an old access code he had never returned, he bypassed the electronic lock and slipped into the narrow corridor behind the staff elevators. The hallway was dim and silent, lit only by a single emergency light. There, he disabled the safety interlock that prevented elevators from moving when maintenance was underway. He also bypassed the kill switch designed to keep the cab stationary when someone was on top of it. He worked carefully, making sure each wire was disconnected in a way that would not trigger an alarm. The trap was set. He left the building the same way he came in, unnoticed. The next morning, Lee phoned the library's service desk from a prepaid mobile phone. He reported that one of the staff lifts was jammed between floors and acting strangely. Daniel, known for being hands-on and unwilling to wait for outside help, decided to inspect it himself before calling for professional repair. He grabbed a flashlight from his office and headed toward the dim corridor leading to the service shaft. A junior staffer later recalled seeing Daniel step into the narrow passage, his flashlight beam cutting across the concrete walls. The staffer heard him muttering about checking the car roof for a mechanical fault. He said something about it probably being a loose cable or misaligned sensor. Moments later, the service elevator groaned and began to rise, even though no call button had been pressed. The movement was slow at first, then faster. A sudden shout echoed inside the shaft. The staffer froze in place, unsure of what was happening. Then came a metallic clatter, the sound of Daniel's flashlight striking the concrete floor below. By the time the worker reached the doorway and looked inside, the sounds had already gone silent. The elevator had stopped moving. When others arrived and the power was cut to the system, the elevator was found pressed tight against the top of the shaft. Daniel had climbed onto the cab roof to inspect the mechanism and was pinned in the narrow ceiling space above, his body wedged between steel and concrete. There had been less than a foot of clearance. The damage was instant and fatal. Investigators discovered the interlock had been manually bypassed and the kill switch disabled. Security footage showed a man entering the service corridor the night before using an old access code. His build and gait matched Lee Han, the former supervisor, In his apartment, police later found tools coated with grease from the library's elevator system and printouts of the building's mechanical diagrams. He was arrested within a week, and the case was ruled a premeditated act of revenge carried out with technical precision. It was May 30th, 2015, in Key Largo, Florida, and the morning was clear and calm. The water was flat inside the reef line, and charter boats idled along the channel. On a small dive boat tied off near a coral wall, students listened to a short briefing before their first descent. Leading the group was Mark Grant, a 32-year-old scuba instructor at a small neighborhood dive club. Mark worked year-round teaching entry-level classes. In the weeks before the dive, rumors spread that he had started seeing the girlfriend of one of the club's advanced divers. The rival was older, bitter, and had keys to the gear shed from past volunteer work. He knew the equipment well, where the compressors were and which tanks Mark used. Mark's cylinders were easy to spot with his initials stenciled near the boot. Late one night, the rival unlocked the storage cage and rolled Mark's favorite tank to the bench near the compressor room. He cracked the valve to bleed it down to zero, then clipped a whip from a tall supply bottle and refilled the cylinder with pure nitrogen. He set the pressure to normal, about 3,000 psi, so the gauge would look right in the morning. He wiped the tank with a rag, returned it to the rack, and locked the cage behind him. The swap took only minutes. There was no analyzer on the club table because the class was using standard air, not nitrox. No one would think to test it. The next day, the group prepared for a training dive to 40 feet along a coral wall. Mark checked his gear on the boat deck. He opened his valve, checked his pressure, and took a few breaths from the regulator. Everything seemed normal. Nitrogen feels no different until you're under pressure. The hiss was clean. The gauge read full. The group descended in pairs. An eyewitness student said Mark led at the front, a few yards above the sand. 5 minutes into the dive, his movements changed. He reached for the line but missed. His kicks became erratic. His eyes appeared glassy behind the mask, and his movements lost coordination. He fumbled with his regulator, and it slipped from his mouth. Bubbles frosted his mask as it flooded. A diver next to him tried to donate air with an octopus regulator, but Mark did not bite down. His hands were slow and uncoordinated, moving as though he could not understand what was happening. In seconds, he went limp. The assistant diver grabbed his harness and began a controlled ascent, kicking hard toward the surface. But the class had spread out along the reef. 2 more students surfaced early in a panic, waving at the boat and shouting for help. The captain threw a tagline and radioed for emergency help. When the crew rolled Mark over the transom, he was unresponsive. Another dive boat had sent down a rescue diver to help lift him from the bottom after he began to sink. That diver later said only Mark's gear looked wrong. Everyone else returned, breathing hard but normal. Back at the dock, the club quarantined the equipment. The sheriff's office sealed the cylinder and took it for testing. The gas analysis told the story. The seized tank showed no measurable oxygen, only nitrogen. The other students' cylinders, sampled from the same fill batch, tested as normal compressed air at roughly 21% oxygen. The problem was not the compressor or the boat. It was a single tank. Investigators pulled the shop's entry logs and camera clips from the alley behind the gear shed. The night before the dive, the rival's key fob opened the cage just before 10:45 p.m. A security camera caught his truck backing up to the side door and his silhouette moving across the compressor room window. In his garage, deputies found a valve wrench with fresh tool marks and a partially drained industrial nitrogen bottle used for gas blending. His phone showed a late-night search for an oxygen analyzer, not required for air. Confronted with the test results and the entry logs, he admitted he had swapped a tank to teach him a lesson. He was arrested within days. The case was ruled a premeditated act of revenge carried out with simple knowledge of scuba equipment. The club padlocked its gear shed and posted a sign on the counter: analyzers required for any personal cylinders. Word spread fast along the Florida Keys. Divers talked quietly about how a normal gauge reading and a familiar hiss could still hide an empty breath. It was November 6th, 2015, in London, and the rain had just cleared from the West End streets. Inside the Harrington Playhouse, rehearsals were underway on the dim stage. Among the cast was Simon Gray, a 26-year-old understudy who had recently been promoted to a lead role. Simon had stepped in after the original actor, Edward Price, left in anger. Edward had been vocal about losing the part, arguing with directors and crew before storming out. Though dismissed, he still knew the theater well. Before acting, Edward had worked stagehand jobs where he learned the ropes, pulleys and counterweight systems that moved curtains and backdrops. That knowledge would later become the means of his revenge. The counterweight system used in the Harrington Playhouse was old but effective. Sandbags balanced the heavy curtains and scenery flats, allowing a single person to raise or lower them. Each weight was stitched in canvas and stacked neatly in the fly loft above the stage. In the dark, they all looked the same. Edward knew he could tamper with one without raising suspicion. On a quiet night before rehearsal, he entered through a side door using the access card he still had. Stagehands often left latches loose, so no one noticed he was inside. He located the set of weights assigned to the main curtain and removed one sandbag. In its place, he hung a look-alike sack filled not with sand, but a solid concrete block weighing nearly 80 pounds. He stitched the canvas tight to hide the shape, brushed dust across the seams, and returned the line to its original position. To the eye, nothing looked unusual. To the hand, the weight felt the same on the rope until it dropped. The following afternoon, the cast gathered for rehearsal. The house lights were dimmed, and only the stage lamps burned. Simon stood at the wing, following cues with the script tucked under one arm. As part of his entrance, he needed to pull the curtain line. Several actors nearby remembered watching him step to the rope, plant his feet, and give it a firm tug. At first, the curtain shifted normally. Then came the sound of a rope hissing through pulleys, followed by a sharp crack overhead. Before anyone could react, the disguised counterweight plunged. It fell straight down the guide track and struck Simon on the top of his head with enough force to collapse him instantly to the stage. His script scattered across the boards as he dropped. One castmate shouted in panic while others froze in silence. A thin cloud of plaster dust drifted from the rafters, stirred loose by the jolt of the falling block. Stagehands who had been adjusting lights rushed forward but stopped short at the sight. The block rolled once before settling, its canvas cover torn to reveal gray concrete beneath. The rehearsal ended in chaos. Someone called for emergency services, while others gathered in small, stunned groups near the footlights. The theater went silent, except for the hum of the old lamps overhead. Investigators later examined the rigging. The weights were cataloged, and only one was abnormal. Tests confirmed the block weighed nearly double the normal counterweight. Security checks revealed Edward's access card had been used at the side door the night before, long after official crew hours. When officers searched his flat, they found stitching tools, leftover canvas, and traces of powdered cement on his workbench. He was arrested within days. The case was ruled a deliberate act of sabotage carried out with knowledge only an insider would possess. It was August 21st, 2017, in Santa Monica, California, and the boardwalk was quiet after midnight. Inside the amusement park, the rides were dark except for scattered service lights. The only machine running was the Thunder Drop roller coaster, a steel track that wound through tunnels and sharp curves. Maintenance crews often sent cars through test runs before opening or after repairs. Running this section was Marcus Allen, a 35-year-old senior ride operator. Marcus had worked the coaster for years and was trusted to oversee safety checks. He also had a reputation among staff for being harsh with junior workers. Several trainees had filed complaints about his bullying, but supervisors rarely acted on them. One of those complaints came from Leah Ramos, a seasonal employee who eventually quit. Her concerns went unanswered, but her brother Ethan worked nearby and had access to maintenance diagrams of the coaster. He studied the track, noting where a blind tunnel passed close to a service platform. That section, hidden from the main midway, became central to his plan. On a night when inspections were scheduled, Ethan entered the service area with a length of steel cable. He stretched it across the tunnel opening at neck height, fastening it tightly to anchor points on either side. The dim bulbs inside the tunnel gave little reflection, and from the front seat of a speeding car, the cable would be almost invisible. Once set, he left through a staff exit. The cable remained taut, waiting. Later that night, Marcus prepared for a routine single-car test run. A janitor working nearby saw him unlock the gate, step into the loading bay, and settle into the front seat. With no passengers and no fanfare, the restraints clicked shut. The car rolled forward, gathering speed as it climbed the first hill. The sound of wheels rattled up the incline and disappeared into the structure. Moments later, the janitor paused his sweeping. The usual echoes of the ride, the roar of descent, and the screech of turns were cut short. Instead, there was a sudden silence, broken only by the ocean wind. Minutes passed until the car coasted slowly back into the station. Marcus sat slumped in the seat. His upper body leaned forward, unmoving. Across his neck was a severe laceration, the cut running straight across. The janitor, stunned, later told investigators he noticed a brief glint inside the tunnel before hearing a sharp snap. The cable had broken loose after the strike, one end dangling from the platform rail. The test run was halted immediately. Park security sealed the coaster and kept workers back. Maintenance crews examined the tunnel and found the remnants of the steel line still bolted at one end, the other frayed from force. Investigators traced the tampering to tool marks, matching wrenches found in Ethan Ramos's garage. Records showed he had obtained the blueprints months earlier through a contractor friend. He was arrested within a week. The case was ruled a calculated act of revenge carried out with precision inside the hidden structure of the ride. The Thunder Drop stayed locked behind steel gates. For weeks, locals walked past the coaster in silence, knowing the ride that once brought excitement had become the stage for a killing disguised as a test. It was February 3, 2019, in Port Orford, Oregon. The early morning was foggy and quiet, with only light drizzle moving across the harbor and the usual sounds of gulls over the docks. Evelyn Park, 47, was a marine biologist known in coastal research circles for her work on habitat degradation and fish population decline along Oregon's shoreline. She spent most of her career collaborating with state agencies to track illegal harvesting patterns and assess their long-term ecological impact. Her findings had been used in several environmental cases, and colleagues described her as methodical, quiet, and deeply focused on data rather than conflict. Her testimony in late 2018 was part of a broader investigation into repeated quota violations and off-record sales tied to local operators, including longtime fisherman Greg Dalton. Dalton, 52, had spent over 2 decades working the same coastal routes, relying on seasonal catches to support his family and maintain his boat. When federal investigators began monitoring irregular landings from his vessel, Dalton saw the inquiry as an inconvenience, not a threat. Park's testimony, which relied on recorded population declines and matched harvest anomalies to Dalton's activity zones, played a central role in confirming the violations. Dalton's conviction cost him his license, boat, and home, and his marriage collapsed soon after. He fixated on Park, blaming her testimony for his downfall and recasting it as a personal betrayal, fueling a slow, deliberate motive for revenge. Unlike typical harassment patterns, Dalton's approach was methodical and patient. He spent weeks studying Park's research schedule by monitoring marine biology department announcements and harbor activity logs. He learned that Park conducted solo water sampling trips on the first Tuesday of each month, always departing between 7 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. Dalton's plan required intimate knowledge of Park's boat and routine. He had previously worked as a marine mechanic and understood boat systems thoroughly. Rather than confronting Park directly, he chose to intercept her at sea where no witnesses would be present. On February 3rd, Park departed alone to collect water samples from a research buoy located in 120-foot deep water 4 miles offshore. Following her standard research protocol, she logged her departure time as 7:15 a.m. in the Marina Register. At 8:30 a.m., a commercial fisherman observed Park's vessel adrift, with the engine idling and no one visible on deck. Coast Guard responders arrived within 45 minutes and found Park's body floating 300 yards from her boat. The boat's deck contained scattered research equipment, a broken marine radio, and bloodstains concentrated near the stern area. Investigation revealed Park had been struck multiple times with a metal winch handle. 5 weighted crab pots, each weighing approximately 50 pounds, connected by 60 feet of marine-grade line, were found secured to Park's ankle with heavy-duty marine shackles. 2 marina workers later reported seeing Dalton loitering near Park's slip shortly before sunrise. Tool marks on the winch handle and metal components of the shackles matched implements found in Dalton's truck. Store receipts confirmed his purchase of additional crab pots and marine hardware 2 days earlier. Marina security footage captured Dalton hiding inside Park's boat storage compartment before her departure. Investigators reported that Dalton admitted during questioning that he had concealed himself on the vessel, struck Park with the winch handle when she reached the sampling site, and attached the weighted crab pots before pushing her overboard. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was drowning, with contributory blunt force trauma to the skull from repeated winch handle impact. It was September 22, 2016, in Riverside, California. The early morning was quiet, and nothing in the neighborhood seemed out of place when a house fire suddenly began to spread through a single-story home. David Martinez, 39, a municipal code enforcement officer with 12 years of experience, had recently cited Steve Chen, 41, for operating an unlicensed auto repair business in his residential garage. The citation resulted in Chen being forced to shut down his business and pay substantial fines during a neighborhood compliance sweep. The enforcement action occurred during Chen's daughter's graduation party, which he was hosting in his driveway. Martinez arrived with a full inspection team and police backup, forcing Chen to shut down both the party and his business operations in front of 60 family members, neighbors, and his daughter's friends. Chen's humiliation was compounded by the public nature of the enforcement. Neighbors who had previously respected Chen as a skilled mechanic witnessed him being cited and forced to close his business. The incident was particularly devastating because Chen had been operating the business for 8 years without complaints. He viewed Martinez's enforcement as deliberately timed to cause maximum embarrassment during his family celebration. Chen's escalation took the form of systematic vandalism rather than direct confrontation. He began by spray painting accusations of harassment on Martinez's inspection truck at various job sites. The vandalism escalated to slashing tires, breaking windows, and leaving threatening messages. Chen's campaign expanded to Martinez's home. He threw rocks through windows, poured paint on the driveway, and scattered garbage across the lawn during nighttime hours. Each incident was designed to create the same public embarrassment that Chen's family had experienced. The vandalism pattern continued for 6 weeks, with Chen becoming increasingly bold. He began timing his attacks to coincide with Martinez's work schedule, ensuring maximum psychological impact. Chen studied Martinez's routine to identify the most vulnerable times for property damage. Chen's final escalation occurred when he learned that Martinez lived alone and worked predictable hours. Chen identified the basement window vulnerability during one of his surveillance sessions and decided to escalate beyond property damage to direct action. At 2:45 a.m., Chen entered Martinez's residence through the unsecured basement window. Gasoline was systematically distributed throughout the first floor, with particular concentration near doorways and windows. Chen used lightweight wooden chairs and furniture items to create obstacles at both exit doors. After igniting the accelerant, Chen exited through the basement window. The fire spread rapidly through the gasoline-soaked first floor, creating intense heat and smoke that filled the upper level where Martinez was sleeping. Martinez attempted to exit through both doors, but found them blocked. He broke his bedroom window, but collapsed before escaping due to smoke inhalation. Fire department personnel arrived within 8 minutes, but found the structure fully engulfed. Martinez was pronounced dead at the scene after firefighters reached his location 20 minutes later. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was acute smoke inhalation with carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigation revealed gasoline residue throughout the first floor and clear evidence that both exit doors had been intentionally obstructed. Fire investigators noted chair placement patterns inconsistent with normal household use, indicating deliberate blockage. A security camera 2 houses down captured Chen walking toward Martinez's property around 2:40 a.m., moments before ignition. Gasoline residue was detected on Chen's shoes and clothing at arrest, and cell tower data placed him within a 3-mile radius during the ignition timeframe. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years. It was November 14, 2015, in Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. Dawn was cold and still, with a thin layer of frost settling over the trees, typical conditions for peak deer hunting season. Mark Thompson, 42, a licensed hunting guide with 15 years of experience, had recently been guiding Billy Garrett's 17-year-old son on his first deer hunt when Thompson's negligence led to a serious hunting accident. Thompson had positioned the teenager in an unsafe tree stand that collapsed, causing severe injuries. Garrett's son suffered a broken back and internal injuries when the poorly maintained tree stand failed during the hunt. Thompson had failed to inspect the stand's condition before allowing the inexperienced hunter to use it, despite being responsible for ensuring client safety. The accident occurred because Thompson was guiding multiple hunters simultaneously and had not properly maintained his equipment. He had rushed the safety briefing and failed to check the stand's structural integrity, violating basic guide safety protocols. Garrett's son required multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The injury ended his plans to join the military after high school and left him with permanent mobility limitations. Medical bills exceeded $200,000, creating severe financial strain for the family. Thompson's incident report portrayed the accident as an unforeseeable equipment failure, rather than acknowledging his failure to maintain and inspect the tree stand. Garrett, 48, viewed Thompson's report as dishonest and an attempt to avoid liability for his son's injuries. Rather than direct confrontation, Garrett chose to attack Thompson's safety in the same environment where his son had been injured. He viewed Thompson's negligence as having violated the basic trust that clients place in professional guides. Garrett's plan emerged from his intimate knowledge of Thompson's hunting locations and his desire to create a situation where Thompson would experience the same sudden danger that his son had faced due to equipment failure. Tool mark analysis confirmed that the primary load-bearing beam of Thompson's permanent tree stand had been cut 60% through with a handsaw consistent with one recovered from Garrett's truck. The cut was positioned to weaken the beam while maintaining temporary stability under static load. At 5:30 a.m., Thompson climbed into the tree stand. When he shifted his weight to observe movement below, the weakened primary beam failed, immediately overloading the secondary support. Thompson fell 18 feet, landing among tree roots with the platform falling on top of him. A nearby hunter heard the collapse and found Thompson conscious but unable to move his legs. Emergency services were contacted, but Thompson died from internal injuries before evacuation. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was internal hemorrhaging and spinal cord trauma from the fall, combined with crushing injuries from the collapsed structure. The remote location delayed paramedic arrival by 22 minutes. Investigators reviewed Thompson's recent incident history and noted the earlier hunting accident that had severely injured Garrett's son, placing Garrett on their initial list of persons of interest. Another individual familiar with the area later reported seeing Garrett's truck parked near Thompson's stand 2 days earlier, at a time when no hunts were scheduled. Investigation revealed deliberate saw cuts and matching sawdust in Garrett's truck. Stolen trail cameras and the handsaw were recovered from Garrett's residence. Garrett was convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. It was March 8, 2018, in the industrial district of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The afternoon was warm, heavy, and still inside the enclosed buildings, typical of the area's dense industrial corridors. Angela Foster, 36, an environmental consultant specializing in industrial facility assessments, had recently discovered that Tom Broussard, 41, a plant manager she had been dating for 8 months, had been using their relationship to obtain advance information about upcoming environmental audits at his facility. Foster learned about Broussard's deception when she discovered that he had been sharing her audit schedules and methodologies with other plant managers in the region. Broussard had been using their relationship to help multiple facilities prepare for environmental assessments, undermining the effectiveness of Foster's work. The betrayal extended beyond professional misconduct. Foster realized that Broussard had initiated their relationship specifically to gain access to environmental compliance information. He had researched her background and deliberately pursued her at industry conferences. Foster's discovery led to an investigation that revealed a pattern of facilities passing environmental audits that should have failed. Broussard had been providing advance warning about specific violations that consultants would be examining, allowing companies to temporarily address problems before assessments. When Foster reported the misconduct, Broussard was terminated from his position and faced potential criminal charges for obstruction of environmental enforcement. However, Broussard blamed Foster for the investigation, claiming she had violated his trust by reporting their relationship. Unlike other cases involving prolonged harassment, Broussard's approach was direct and immediate. His anger was triggered when Foster's report led to investigations at multiple facilities, where he had provided inside information, destroying his reputation throughout the industry. Broussard focused his rage into a single, calculated act of revenge that he planned to execute during Foster's next assessment at an industrial facility, where he still had access through former colleagues. Broussard obtained legitimate visitor credentials by scheduling a meeting with facility management under false pretenses. He purchased muriatic acid and chlorine-based bleach from separate stores, paying with cash. At 1:15 p.m., Foster was documenting violations in a small electrical room when Broussard appeared. He had pre-mixed the chemicals in a sealed container outside the room. He opened the container inside the confined space, releasing concentrated chlorine gas, then quickly exited and secured the door using a steel bar. The chlorine gas rapidly concentrated in the sealed room. Foster's inspection materials were found scattered near the door, indicating her attempt to escape. Plant maintenance worker Carlos heard Foster calling for help and removed the steel bar obstruction. Finding Foster unconscious, Foster was transported to the hospital, but died from chlorine gas poisoning despite medical intervention. Facility entry logs showed that Broussard had checked in shortly before the incident, despite having no legitimate appointment scheduled. Security logs also verified that he had used visitor credentials to enter restricted areas earlier that afternoon. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was acute chlorine gas poisoning, resulting in severe chemical burns to the respiratory system and pulmonary edema. Broussard was arrested attempting to leave the facility. Investigation revealed the chemical container and steel bar inside the electrical room. Store receipts confirmed his chemical purchases, and security footage verified his presence at both stores. Broussard was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years. It was July 19, 2017, in downtown Seattle, Washington. The morning was clear and mild, and the high-rise construction site had settled into its usual rhythm as crews prepared for inspections. Nothing about the conditions suggested the kind of event that would permanently alter the project's history. Robert Kim, 31, is a safety inspector assigned to monitor code compliance across the region's high-rise developments. Kim had recently issued a shutdown order at a major project after documenting multiple deviations from state-mandated scaffolding and tie-off standards. The violations had been tied to 40-year-old foreman Jake Sullivan, who had been implementing a series of modern European fall protection techniques he believed were safer than the traditional American systems required by code. Sullivan had spent years advocating for these methods, compiling data that showed improved accident outcomes on the projects where he had quietly used them. He believed the shutdown not only dismissed his work, but publicly marked him as a foreman who couldn't follow basic regulations, a label that spread quickly in contracting circles. Within a week, Sullivan was removed from his position, his reputation damaged, and several upcoming jobs rescinded based on concerns about compliance reliability. To Sullivan, this wasn't simply a professional disagreement. He saw Kim's enforcement as an attack on his credibility and a personal humiliation that destroyed his livelihood. The shutdown happened during a morning walkthrough in front of crew members, subcontractors, and supervisors. In Sullivan's eyes, Kim's strict adherence to code language had not only halted progress, but had ruined him publicly. The resentment grew steadily, turning into a focused intent to retaliate. Sullivan knew Kim continued to perform routine inspections at the same site. Drawing on his familiarity with the project's layout, he identified a section of exterior scaffolding where Kim often photographed structural connectors. Over several evenings, when the site was inactive, Sullivan used retained access from a previous project assignment to enter restricted floors. He selectively loosened a series of anchor bolts and tie-in brackets along a 20-foot span at the 8th floor level. The section remained stable under light static load, but was critically weakened at its primary connection points. On the morning of the incident, Sullivan positioned himself on the 9th floor deck with a sledgehammer. Kim arrived shortly after 9 a.m. for a routine inspection. As expected, he moved beneath the compromised 8th floor connectors to photograph a previously flagged section of scaffolding. From ground level, the structure appeared stable, and the loosened bolts showed no visible distortion. Standing directly underneath gave Kim the only clear upward angle needed to document the tie-in spacing for his report. When Kim stepped directly into position, Sullivan delivered multiple sledgehammer strikes to the final load-bearing bolts. The compromised connections failed in sequence. The scaffolding section detached and dropped as a single mass, striking Kim before collapsing across the lower deck. Worker Mark Wilson, who was preparing equipment nearby, heard the impacts and saw Sullivan holding the sledgehammer. He immediately called emergency services while attempting to reach Kim through the debris. Kim suffered catastrophic blunt force trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. Paramedics confirmed that the structural collapse had caused fatal chest injuries and severe internal damage. Investigators later identified deliberate tool marks on the loosened connectors. Access logs confirmed Sullivan had used outdated credentials during off hours, and security footage placed him on the 9th floor shortly before the collapse. Wilson's eyewitness account matched the physical evidence. Sullivan was arrested the same day, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 25 years. It was October 12, 2016, in rural Kansas. The afternoon was dry and still, the kind of weather that let grain dust linger inside poorly ventilated storage buildings. Paul Anderson, 17, a scholarship student from a low-income family, had been systematically bullied by Jake Morrison, 18, a wealthy farming family's son, for over 2 years. Morrison's bullying included physical intimidation, social exclusion, and public humiliation. Students later told investigators that Morrison frequently mocked Anderson's clothes and part-time job in front of others. Several classmates also reported that Morrison's behavior became more aggressive after Anderson was selected for a state academic competition that both had entered. The situation reached a breaking point when Morrison's bullying became physical. During a brutal incident in the school parking lot, Morrison and several friends cornered Anderson, pushed him to the ground, and kicked him repeatedly while recording the assault on their phones. The video spread across student group chats within hours and was reposted on several accounts. Anderson filed a report with school administrators, but records show that Morrison received only a short suspension. Several staff emails later obtained during the investigation referenced concerns about community pressure related to Morrison's family. Recovered phone records showed Anderson researching Morrison's weekend duties at the grain elevator and reading articles on grain dust hazards and ventilation failures. Investigators later found plastic sheeting over several vents and an exhaust fan switched off. Tool marks on control panels indicated he had attempted to reduce airflow and raise dust levels inside the bin, though not all systems were successfully disabled. Security footage captured Morrison arriving at 2:44 p.m. Minutes later, both he and Anderson were seen entering the main storage area. Investigators noted signs of a brief struggle near the access ladder, along with disturbed dust patterns leading into the bin. Tool impressions on the exterior hatch suggested it had been pulled shut from the outside, indicating Anderson intended to remain outside before the ignition occurred. Fire investigators concluded that airborne grain dust had accumulated to hazardous levels due to reduced ventilation and active conveyor movement. Burn patterns indicated an ignition occurred near the hatch, consistent with an open flame. The resulting pressure wave traveled through the enclosed space, triggering a localized deflagration inside the bin. Damage patterns showed that the ignition produced a pressure surge strong enough to blow back through openings near the access platform. Anderson was found just outside the hatch, indicating he had remained close to the ignition point. Investigators determined that he was fatally injured by the outward flash and pressure wave as the deflagration expanded inside the bin. A neighboring farmer observed smoke and called emergency services. Emergency responders arrived within 15 minutes, but found the grain bin severely damaged by an internal explosion. Both Anderson and Morrison were pronounced dead after firefighters gained access to the structure. Investigators documented sealed vents, a manually disabled exhaust fan, and a lighter recovered near the hatch area. Both teens' phones contained the earlier assault footage, and Anderson's recent searches related to grain dust hazards. Tool marks on several access panels confirmed deliberate interference with safety components. Following the incident, the grain facility was temporarily closed pending safety inspections and required retrofits. The school district initiated an internal review after the assault footage circulated publicly, and Anderson's family later filed a civil claim regarding prior reports of bullying. At the time of the case summary, the claim was still in early proceedings. The medical examiner listed Morrison's cause of death as thermal injuries and blast trauma consistent with an internal grain dust deflagration. Anderson's injuries matched an outward pressure wave originating from the hatch area, and his death was classified as accidental during the commission of a homicide. The case was formally closed after the findings were released. It was June 18, 2015, and the city was trading sun for wind. Mitchell Grant, 34, facade technician for a mid-sized renovation crew, careful and methodical by nature, was wrapping a long day on a 2-point suspension scaffold at the northeast face of a mid-rise. Nearby moved a temporary rigger, Wade Thompson, 36, impatient and resentful, the kind who rushed checklists and bristled at reminders. A week earlier, Mitchell's report had cost Wade a full-time contract. He'd spent the rest of the week seething, calling Mitchell a rules-obsessed snitch. Watching from the ground was the site supervisor, 45, by the book and steady. A week earlier, a complaint noted excess slack on lifelines and a sharp-edged bracket where a secondary line passed, a weakness Wade may have exploited rather than created. Mitchell's task was modest, patching and sealant touch-ups near the 10th floor. He clipped in, tested his weight, and adjusted the lanyard gate. Debris nets were tight, the drop zone coned off, pedestrians sparse. The wind pushed and released in irregular breaths. When the hoist engaged for a small raise, no more than 3 feet, the left tie-in jolted. The scaffold deck trembled, pushing a lifeline across that old bracket. The secondary line had wear that didn't belong. The jacket split under load, and the primary line, already abraded, took the shock. The platform tipped. Mitchell's right boot caught the toe board. Momentum folded him over the mid-rail. The fall arrest system did not engage. Later inspection revealed the lanyard snap hook had been threaded backward through the D-ring, secure at a glance, but useless under load. He fell past the lit windows. A projecting setback met him first. The right side of his skull struck. The ledge forced his chest into the edge, fracturing ribs and disrupting breathing. The right femur broke on the stone lip. The spine suffered at the cervical level. He fell again to the exclusion zone below, landing on his left side. The injuries were the kind that remove options. The skull fracture depressed the bone into the brain tissue. Multiple rib fractures compressed the thorax. The femur broke internally. The neck injury risked the pathways that drive respiration. Witnesses reported a double impact that echoed between buildings. The supervisor ran for the gate, radio in hand. Responders found a pulseless, unresponsive patient with absent breathing. Pupils were fixed. Compressions began, airway maneuvers followed, and a monitor drew a straight line. Nothing shifted the course. Death was confirmed. Attention turned to the scaffold and gear. The secondary lifeline showed damage at a clean angle where it met the bracket, inconsistent with normal wear. The primary line bore marks that didn't fit everyday abrasion. Inventory revealed a missing cutting tool. Interviews documented strained exchanges between Mitchell and the temporary rigger over safety reminders. The supervisor produced earlier notes about slack on lifelines. When investigators reviewed site CCTV, they found Wade Thompson returning alone to the platform an hour before startup, carrying his cutting tool. Photographs fixed the positions, platform angle, bracket alignment, and the path the lines had followed. Measurements noted distances from rail to ledge to pavement. Weather records marked gusts that could aggravate but not explain the simultaneous failure of redundancies. Reconstruction concluded that equipment condition and line integrity were incompatible with routine wear. The narrative that emerged was not of a bad moment in the wind, but of a sequence made possible before anyone stepped onto the platform. The supervisor closed the binder on the earlier complaint, now part of a chain. Co-workers spoke of a man who liked procedures and kept his harness clean. The building continued to rise, the facade patching reassigned, the scaffold sealed for examination. Wade Thompson resigned the next day and disappeared before police completed interviews. On paper, the cause read, blunt force trauma from a fall. On the ground, the change was an absence at a mid-rail, where a careful worker had laid his glove while checking a line. It was November 12, 2015, and the evening shift at the regional hospital was winding down. Courtney Blake, 29, a respiratory therapist with a reputation for thoroughness, was gathering her things from the staff locker room. Her compact sedan waited in the multi-level parking garage 3 floors up. What she didn't know was that her former partner, Erica Lawson, 31, a retail clerk with meticulous habits and a passive-aggressive streak, had been tracking her schedule for weeks. The breakup 6 months earlier had left property disputes unresolved. Courtney had mentioned that her car had been pulling left and vibrating after low-speed turns. 2 tire pressure warnings had appeared recently, but visual inspection showed nothing wrong. What wasn't visible was that the lug nuts had been systematically loosened, just enough to allow gradual elongation of the stud holes under normal driving stress. The parking garage's descending spiral ramp had concrete barriers and a damp surface from recent drizzle. Courtney started her descent at a reasonable speed, unaware that her former partner had spent time earlier that week with a lug wrench, carefully backing off each nut to a precise tension that would hold under parking lot speeds but fail under the lateral forces of the curved ramp. As the sedan began its descent, the left front corner exhibited increased shimmy that grew with each turn. A metallic rattle developed as the wheel, with compromised lug nuts, began to wobble against elongated stud holes. At the 3rd turn, the left front wheel sheared completely free. The wheel separation was catastrophic. The hub dropped, scraping the brake rotor against concrete in a shower of sparks. The vehicle yawed hard left as steering became uncontrollable. The rim struck the concrete barrier with tremendous force, triggering rapid deceleration that threw Courtney against her shoulder belt. Airbags deployed with explosive force, causing facial abrasions. The impact caused the car to mount the curb lip. The undercarriage snagged, acting as a pivot point that caused the vehicle to rotate and impact the support pillar with the driver's side. The pillar strike compressed the left side of the passenger compartment. Courtney sustained multiple left side rib fractures, a pulmonary contusion that compromised breathing, a splenic laceration that began bleeding internally, and a left clavicle fracture. The compression accelerated internal bleeding from her damaged spleen. Her breath sounds diminished rapidly as blood filled her chest cavity. A garage attendant arrived within minutes, noted her shallow breathing was slowing, and called emergency services. Investigation revealed the deliberate nature of the wheel failure. All 5 lug nuts were found partially threaded with matching tool marks, inconsistent with professional service. Surveillance footage showed Erica Lawson's vehicle entering the structure multiple times during the previous week. Accident reconstruction confirmed the lug nuts had been intentionally loosened to a specific tension that would allow normal operation while ensuring failure under lateral forces. Police arrested Erica Lawson 3 days later at her retail workplace. She was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with a motor vehicle. During interrogation, she initially denied involvement, but broke down when confronted with the surveillance evidence. 8 months later, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. It was April 23, 2016, and the pre-dawn air at the small public marina carried the chill of early spring. Adrian Wells, 41, independent marine mechanic with calloused hands, had agreed to meet at the wooden dock to check an engine noise. His small outboard skiff bobbed against the weathered planks. What Adrian didn't know was that his former business associate, Zane Mitchell, 44, an independent contractor with calculating eyes, had arrived earlier under the pretense of returning borrowed tools. The partnership had dissolved 6 months earlier over disputed debts. A fisherman, 59, quiet and methodical, was preparing tackle at a nearby slip. Adrian had mentioned that his stern line seemed loose, and he'd noticed that a dock cleat had been rebolted with mismatched screws. Adrian stepped aboard his skiff and tugged the bowline to test its security. The cleat, which had been pre-scored at its base with deliberate cuts, held under gentle tension. He started the engine at idle to listen for the irregular noise. He shifted his weight toward the stern to release that line. With his full weight on the bow line, the compromised cleat reached its failure point. The metal sheared cleanly at the scored base, and the line whipped free. Adrian lost his footing on the wet planks, slick from overnight condensation. He slipped between the dock and boat just as the skiff's lateral motion compressed his chest against the hard dock edge. The impact fractured multiple ribs, creating a flail segment that made breathing difficult. The compression caused a liver laceration, leading to internal bleeding. As he struggled in the cold water, the boat's propeller wash pushed the stern away. The cold water triggered a shock response that impaired his coordination. Adrian's personal flotation device remained in the storage hatch, unworn. The outboard engine continued running, and the boat drifted as he struggled to stay afloat. His head was submerged repeatedly as he fought against the cold water and compromised breathing. Water aspiration began immediately, leading to hypoxia as his damaged chest made breathing nearly impossible. The fisherman heard the engine noise change and the splash. He grabbed a boat hook and rushed toward the sound, but by the time he reached Adrian, the combination of cold water shock, chest trauma, and water aspiration had taken its toll. The fisherman pulled Adrian partially onto the dock using the boat hook, but found no detectable pulse or breathing. Hypoxic cardiac arrest followed quickly, secondary to drowning and blunt chest trauma. The fisherman immediately began CPR while calling for emergency services, but Adrian remained unresponsive. Emergency medical services arrived and continued resuscitation efforts, but Adrian could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation focused on the failed dock cleat. Examination revealed deliberate scoring marks at its base and improper replacement screws inconsistent with marine hardware standards. Metal filings were found near the base, suggesting recent tampering. Security cameras recorded Zane Mitchell's presence at the dock earlier that evening, carrying a tool bag. The fisherman confirmed that the cleat failure preceded Adrian's fall. Investigators photographed the failed cleat, replacement screws, and metal filings. The deliberate scoring and inappropriate hardware pointed to sabotage rather than normal wear. Zane's presence, combined with financial disputes from their dissolved partnership, provided sufficient evidence for his arrest 2 weeks later. He was charged with first-degree murder and destruction of property. It was September 14, 2016, and the loading dock of the local warehouse hummed with afternoon operations. Vanessa Reed, 26, an inventory supervisor with sharp attention to detail, was directing the staging order for expedited shipments. She had the kind of methodical approach that made her valuable to management and occasionally irritating to workers who preferred shortcuts. What she didn't know was that a former temp worker, Kayla Norton, 32, irritable and impulsive, had been rehired for seasonal shifts and was still nursing resentment from conflicts they'd had over inventory audits months earlier. Recent reports had noted loosened shrink wrap on heavy pallets and a missing wheel chock at a frequently used staging bay. The loading dock operated with constant activity and intermittent forklift traffic. Vanessa was supervising counts when she needed to guide a manual pallet jack around a blind corner near a rolling door. The pallet carried stacked cartons nearing the height limit, secured with shrink wrap that appeared intact. As Vanessa maneuvered around the blind corner, the top tier began to lean due to the shrink wrap that had been deliberately loosened at key stress points. A forklift entered the adjacent lane, and Vanessa halted to avoid a collision. The sudden stop created momentum that shifted the load forward, and the compromised wrapping could no longer maintain stack integrity. The top layer began to slide, and a corner carton caught on the pallet edge, causing the entire upper portion to tilt toward Vanessa. She stepped backward to clear the falling load, but her heel caught in a worn seam in the concrete floor. Balance was lost at the critical moment. The compromised stack collapsed with multiple heavy cartons impacting her upper body. The falling mass struck her across the chest and neck, creating immediate severe trauma. She sustained a cervical spine fracture from direct impact, multiple rib fractures from crushing weight, and thoracic compression that led to rapid airway compromise. The falling cartons pinned her across the chest and neck, creating a compression injury that immediately affected her breathing. The audible wheeze initially present ceased as the airway became completely compromised. Nearby workers, including the forklift operator, immediately rushed to lift the cartons and free her. The forklift operator dismounted and assisted with carton removal while calling emergency services. By the time they cleared enough weight to assess Vanessa's condition, she showed no effective breathing pattern and no palpable pulse. The mechanism of death was acute traumatic asphyxia resulting from chest and neck compression, combined with cervical spine injury that damaged neurological pathways controlling respiration. Paramedics confirmed a systole upon arrival and initiated advanced cardiac life support, but the severity of crushing injuries made resuscitation impossible. Vanessa was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigation revealed deliberate cuts in the shrink wrap that undermined tension on top tiers and a missing wheel chock that should have prevented pallet movement. Security cameras showed the former temp worker in the area earlier that day, removing wrap sections and repositioning the wheel chock. The footage showed deliberate tampering with the load securing system. Kayla Norton was arrested at her apartment the following morning and charged with second-degree murder and workplace sabotage. During questioning, she admitted to loosening the shrink wrap out of spite, but claimed she never intended to kill anyone. Witness statements corroborated the sequence: sudden stop, lean of the top tier, stack collapse, and immediate entrapment. The investigation concluded that the primary cause was deliberate sabotage of the pallet's load securing system by someone with warehouse knowledge and staging area access. It was February 8, 2017, and the industrial quarry overlooked near the small town was wrapped in cold, dry air that made metal brittle and footing treacherous. Sean Porter, 38, freelance safety inspector with weathered hands and a cautious nature, had agreed to meet at the quarry rim to view surplus tools. He was the kind of man who double-checked harness stitching and never rushed safety protocols. What he didn't know was that his rival freelancer, Colby Andrews, 40, taciturn and competitive, had arrived earlier under the pretense of showing Sean potential equipment for sale. The two had been competing for the same clients, and a recent dispute had left bitter feelings unresolved. The quarry rim stretched along a dramatic drop, with loose gravel scattered near the edge and limited lighting. A security guard, 63, semi-retired and friendly, was making routine perimeter checks. Sean's safety harness had been inspected recently, with all stitching intact. However, his secondary lanyard showed fresh, unusual wear at the webbing edge. The equipment included basic climbing gear with single and secondary lanyards, designed to anchor to a steel post at the rim. Sean clipped the primary lanyard to the post, testing the connection. Colby suggested that Sean test the line tension while leaning outward to inspect a crate of tools on a ledge below. As Sean leaned outward, the load shifted to the secondary lanyard for slack management. The secondary lanyard, pre-weakened by partial internal cuts invisible from outside, tore under the sudden load transfer. The webbing separated along deliberately scored lines. Sean lost his footing on loose gravel, small stones rolling away under his boots. As he slipped over the rim, the primary lanyard caught momentarily, jerking tight against the anchor point. However, the anchor carabiner had been reoriented by Colby Andrews earlier, positioning it to create cross-loading under stress. The carabiner failed when loaded perpendicular to its intended orientation. Sean fell a significant distance to a rocky ledge jutting from the quarry wall. The impact with the ledge was devastating. He sustained bilateral lower limb fractures, a pelvic fracture, and internal injuries consistent with high-energy trauma. His breathing became shallow as internal bleeding began. The ledge, weakened by weather and blasting, crumbled under the impact. The unstable ledge gave way, and Sean fell again to the quarry floor far below. The second impact caused severe thoracic trauma and probable aortic injury as his chest struck the rocky bottom. Distant workers heard two distinct impacts and alerted security. When responders reached him, they found no carotid pulse and unresponsive pupils. CPR was initiated immediately, but there was no return of spontaneous circulation. The mechanism of death was catastrophic internal hemorrhage from blunt force trauma, including suspected rupture of major blood vessels. Emergency medical services declared death after prolonged resuscitation attempts failed. The combination of fall distance, rocky landing surfaces, and severity of internal injuries had created trauma incompatible with survival. The investigation focused on the harness and anchor system, Inspection revealed internal webbing cuts in the secondary lanyard not visible externally, indicating deliberate sabotage. The carabiner exhibited stress marks consistent with cross-loading failure, and its orientation was inconsistent with proper safety practices. Footprint analysis around the anchor post showed evidence of Colby Andrews's earlier movements, and gravel scuff marks indicated staged positioning near the rim. Security logs confirmed Colby's vehicle at the gate that evening. Police arrested Colby Andrews at his home 5 days later. The investigation concluded that equipment failures were the result of deliberate tampering designed to create a fatal accident, while appearing to be equipment failure and user error. It was August 15, 2018, and the Riverside Park footbridge was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Melanie Cross, 33, a pediatric nurse with gentle hands and a patient demeanor, had agreed to meet on the bridge to resolve a dispute that had been festering for weeks. She preferred to handle conflicts in public settings, believing that open spaces would keep conversations civil. What she didn't anticipate was the volatile nature of her acquaintance, Sabrina Holt, 35, outwardly agreeable but confrontational under stress. The footbridge stretched across the river with wooden planks that had been slick from recent rain. A maintenance note had been filed about algae growth on the bridge planks, and park staff had reported that a rail bolt had worked loose. A jogger, 28, was present for her regular evening run across the bridge. The bridge showed signs of deferred maintenance, with warning signs about slippery surfaces and a partially loose rail segment. Melanie arrived at the agreed time and positioned herself near the center of the bridge. Sabrina Holt approached with a normal demeanor, carrying what looked like a borrowed item being returned. The conversation began calmly, but Sabrina's underlying stress quickly surfaced. Park staff had previously documented a public argument between the two, establishing a pattern of escalating conflict. The verbal exchange escalated rapidly from discussion to argument, then crossed into physical confrontation as Sabrina's frustration boiled over. The confrontation involved physical jostling near the rail, with Sabrina Holt pushing Melanie toward the loose rail segment. The loose rail segment shifted under the pressure, providing no stable support. Her left foot slipped on algae that had accumulated on the wet planks. The combination of the push, the failing rail, and the slippery surface sent her over the side of the bridge. Melanie rotated as she fell, striking a protruding rock on the embankment below with the right side of her head. The impact was devastating, causing a severe skull fracture with immediate subdural hemorrhage. She also sustained a right scapular fracture and multiple superficial abrasions. Her respiration became irregular immediately following the head impact, then became shallow and increasingly ineffective as intracranial pressure from bleeding began to affect the brain centers controlling breathing. The jogger heard the scuffle followed by the impact and immediately changed course to investigate. She reached the embankment and called for help. Melanie exhibited non-purposeful movements initially, but these ceased within minutes. When the jogger reached her, she found no palpable pulse and no effective breathing pattern. The mechanism of death was traumatic brain injury with rapid intracranial bleeding that led to respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest. The severity of the skull fracture had damaged critical areas controlling vital functions. Emergency medical services arrived and began advanced life support measures, but the severe traumatic brain injury and elapsed time made resuscitation impossible. Melanie was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation focused on the fall circumstances and the bridge infrastructure condition. Inspection revealed that the rail bolt had backed out partially, creating instability. Analysis of Melanie's shoe treads showed algae residue consistent with slipping. Park security cameras captured both individuals' approach and positioning near the rail during the confrontation. Witness accounts aligned consistently. Escalating argument, physical confrontation, involving pushing, slip on wet surface, fall over compromised rail, head impact on rocks, and immediate unresponsiveness. Sabrina Holt was arrested at the scene by responding officers after the jogger identified her as the person who pushed Melanie. She was initially charged with manslaughter, but after reviewing the security footage and witness testimony, prosecutors upgraded the charges to second-degree murder, arguing that pushing someone toward a compromised bridge rail showed depraved indifference to human life. The investigation concluded that deferred maintenance, hazardous surface conditions, and deliberate physical confrontation created a scenario where a dispute became fatal due to environmental factors and Sabrina Holt's aggressive behavior. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.